All right, hello everybody. Welcome to this live stream. If you're live now, hit the thumbs up. Let me know where you are in the world, what you're doing, what you're thinking, and let's have a great session today. If you're watching the replay, hit the thumbs up. Let me know in the discussion below where you are in the world, how you're doing, what you're thinking, and also let me know that you're able to hear here and that everything is working with the sound and that you are alive and kicking and interested in how to stop saying stupid things, provided that you're actually saying stupid things, which you might not be, but some people do think that they are. This is a real issue and something that has certainly become very, very prevalent in my mind as I interact with many, many people. And I released a, a blog post some time ago about self-punishment, and I'll share that link with you now because you might find it useful. And it is something that is really driving people crazy, that they are saying things that absolutely do not make them feel good after they say them, and it's really apparent to me what that solution is for that because of some things that I've studied. So I want to share that with you today. But let me know that you're actually alive and interested and here so that we know that you are interested in this, because if not, we can always turn off the engines and do something else. But this is so related to memory, and I want to make that very, very clear to people that when you are worrying about what you said and people's reactions to what you're saying, you're taking up mental energy. And that is mental energy that can be directed at learning, at focusing, concentrating, and enjoying your life, right? At a higher level. So this is really, really important to understand. And we're going to go into it because of the absolute importance of this topic, because I was someone who self-punished myself a lot. There's something called the imposter syndrome rather, and it harms a lot of people, and it absolutely does not need to exist in your life, not even for a second. So we can get that out of your life. Bernie's here, alive and kicking and interested. That's good to know. I know some people, they're driving and it's not safe to type in, but we always like to know that you're actually here and engaged. And it is, in fact, your engagement that drives this discussion and serving you. So we always want to make sure that we're on target and not just throwing things out into the wind because they're cool. And as I mentioned, it is something that has been very, very prevalent. It's one of the most visited pages on the whole site, and people ask about this all the time, and they're very shy about the topic. A lot of people don't want to admit that they have things like imposter syndrome, but I'm going to share with you that I have had it really badly, and what I did to deal with it, and again, tie it all to memory, because it is a memory issue. Remember, any resources that you are directing at internal dialogue is robbing your focus and your concentration, and it is robbing energy that you could be putting towards learning. Even if you're not using memory techniques, it's robbing you of learning, and that's getting in the way of you remembering because you're not paying full, crisp, clean attention to it. So if you haven't said anything yet, please let me know in the chat where you are in the world. Hit the thumbs up and get involved, get active, and if it's not a discussion for you, that is fine as well. But the more active we are, the more we can help each other have the benefit of this knowledge. So what we want to do first and foremost when we are thinking about the issue here is we want to actually think about the issue and that we're thinking about the right thing. So the real problem here, it seems to me, is that people think that other people are paying more attention to what you've just said in a conversation than they actually have. And this is a real problem. This is the real problem. And so there are a lot of cognitive biases, and we'll talk about some of them. But one of the things that helped me immensely get over this and remove imposter syndrome completely, more or less, I mean, the odd time it will creep up, is to understand things like the false consensus effect or the false consensus bias. And one of the resources that really helped me the most in this regard, and there are pros and cons to this, but we'll talk about that in a minute. But one of the resources that you're absolutely going to want to check out is called You Are Not So Smart by Dave McRaney. And it goes through a lot of these cognitive biases. And one of them is this effect where you think that people are considering what you've just said in a conversation, when in fact they have already forgotten it within 2 to 3 seconds. And that is a waste of your energy. It's a waste of, all your brain power, because they've completely forgotten what it was that you just said. And yet here you are punishing yourself, wondering about their response. There are apparently, I just heard Jonathan Haidt talking about this, there's apparently something like a 70% increase in suicides over the last couple of years, because people are sitting there, younger people, and they're posting on the internet pictures of themselves. They're waiting for people to respond. They're waiting for people to interact, kind of like I'm waiting for you guys to be more active in this discussion. But for some reason, everybody's dead. Maybe they're walking zombies or whatever. I don't really care at the end of the day. Why I make these calls for action is because it's for your benefit. But there are people killing themselves because they're posting stuff on the internet and no one's responding. It's just going out into the void. This is incredibly sad. It's incredibly sad because even if they were responding, they would have forgotten it in 2.3 seconds later. One of the things that I'm doing now is a lot of research into apps and trying to imagine what a magnetic Mary method app might look like, and testing different apps and testing my own response to them, seeing what it's like to engage with apps. And it is true. Like, I'll go through Instagram, for example, and I will instantly forget whatever it was that I saw there. Part of the reason is that none of it is so interesting at all. And the other thing is it's just normal. It's just normal. It's completely normal to ignore this. And to forget it, because it really isn't that interesting. And then to know, and this was on Bill Maher that I recently saw this with Jonathan Haidt sharing these figures. It's really, really crazy. I had a family member actually of that age commit suicide, so it really hits me deep in the heart. And this was before social media. We don't really know what exactly was going on there. Or I don't anyway, but really, really unfortunate. And it's escalating apparently. And a lot of it has to do with not just that people think other people are thinking about what you just said, but they're not even remembering the thing that they may have seen that they didn't engage with. So that's pretty sad. And, thank you, James, and thank you, MPC Tube, for saying hello. Again, it's for your benefit. I don't really have an ego in it. I don't care. One of my main concerns with the thumbs up and the chats and comments is, first of all, it tells the robots that it tells Google essentially and YouTube that humans actually care about this content. So the internet is in dark days right now. It's so strange that you could be in danger for just having a cup like this appear on your channel. But support to the bros, because we're in dark days. And one of the reasons why we're in dark days is because of this hypersensitivity to what other people might be thinking, when in reality, they've forgotten about it. So that's really, really tragic. That's really, really sad. And that is leading to death. Blows my mind. So MPC Tube says, hello, the truth of the matter is the memory palace is everything to a good memory, and to attach an impossible word to remember to something similar so that it could help your recall. It is everything to memory. And you know what? It's how you remember anyway. So why not learn more about it and accelerate the process? James says, thanks, I'm listening. Great. Thank you, James. Thanks for letting me know. If you're here live now, let me know in the chat where you are in the world, what you're doing, what you're thinking. And if this has touched your life, it certainly has touched mine. I've lost someone that was in the larger family, and it breaks my heart every time I think about it, that somebody would take their own life. And I've certainly had a lot of suicidal ideation myself that I suffered, and impulses, and I got it figured out, partly because I'm just a stubborn human being, and didn't want to be forced to die, essentially, because of a brain gone awry. So I figured it out, and in my new book that's coming out, I'm going to talk a lot about this, and it's got a big trigger warning on the first page, or somewhere in the first page in the draft, where I'm saying, look, this book is going to tell you the raw truth of some very ugly scenarios that I've been in, but how I got through it, how memory techniques, memory training consistently was ultimately the major cure, because then I could deal better with diet, deal better with sleep, deal better with everything. And this book, You Are Not So Smart, helped me a lot, actually. Although it was later in the game, it helped me a lot. So if you haven't read it, please do. For people who are interested in memory, you'll notice here it says why your memory is mostly fiction. And that's not exactly true, but I get what he's saying, and it's very important to have insight into what he's saying there. So make sure you add this to your digital library and get it down the hatch as soon as possible. And it's just very good to know about the cognitive biases. It's very good to know about the games that your mind plays against you. And it's very, very good to make changes based on insight, because knowledge, right? Knowledge is so permanent because it creates deep chemical brain structural changes. And, if you don't want to take my word for that, you can read Mind Shift by Barbara Oakley, which is a great book. We actually have a huge review about it on the podcast. Now that I think about it, I'll actually share that link with you, because it is such a great book. For some reason, I didn't think about it when I was putting my slides together, but now I'm thinking of it. So you can learn more about, some of the parts of the brain that create pain, like the insular cortex, and how to deal with this, how to get it out of your existence, this mental suffering, this mental pain that is just so destructive and so unnecessary. And I've learned a lot about it, so I want to share that with you today. And Oban says, I'm a walking zombie from England. I'll have to watch fully when I'm not sleep deprived. Didn't know the suicide rate was so high, but I fully believe social media has made it worse. Thanks for that comment, Oban, and definitely watch the replay. Privilege your sleep. We try to once in a while do things for your time zone, although usually, in order for me to privilege my sleep to be at my best possible that's often not at that's at the morning hours for the UK, but we'll do what we can do to do more for that time zone. And I think social media, you're right. And again, those figures, they're presented by Jonathan Haidt, and that you can look it up. It was on the Bill Maher program, and it's on YouTube. And the thing with Jonathan Haidt that's so good is he's such a clear, crisp speaker, presenter of evidence, and you learn a lot from listening to him. Well, thank you, NPC Tube, for that super chat. Really appreciate that, supporting the cause, and that's wonderful. For those of you who want to just do a bit of support, you can go to magneticmarymethod.com/swag. You'll see that from time to time, and that enables me to actually send you a special video when we see you with your swag. And I see Adolfo's here. Hello, Adolfo. Adolfo has sent some great pictures of his stuff, and really great to see that the Magnetic Mary Method cup out there in the world. So that's great. And speaking of cups, I've thanked her before, but thanks Maricella for these wonderful cups here with the coins. Really, really great. And this one, of course, makes the evil Dr. Forget feel very good. For those of you who haven't met the evil Dr. Forget, he's here. He's always ready to freeze your memory. I am the evil Dr. Forget. But of course we have the wonderful, everyday superhero, Edgar the Elephant. Hello, I'm Edgar the Elephant. I'm here to become an elephantologist. And of course, Edgar's mother was killed by the evil Elon Tusk, who took her tusks and implanted them into the heart of the evil Dr. Forget. Anyway, more on that coming in 2019, but having a lot of fun with some storytelling for that. Let's see here. NPC Tube says, thanks for being the guard keeper of memory. thank you for your support. And we couldn't do it without all of you and your wonderful engagement when you're so inclined to engage. And of course, again, we do this partly to have a community, to talk to each other, to have meaningful discussions and interaction that actually is beneficial for your brain. And we do it, of course, to tell the robots that humans are interested, engaged, paying attention. And believe it or not, those algorithms listen, and then they bring more people for us to engage with and have meaningful discussions with. So this channel, of course, is sponsored by the Magnetic Memory Method free course at magneticmemorymethod.com/YT. And if you haven't signed up for it, I'd like to give you a compelling reason and example with some memory palaces from a recent person named Ray, who just ran with this. And listen to this. He says, "Hello, Anthony. I'm fascinated and encouraged by the samplings of success I've already had. I'm a retired gentleman, never had to memorize a script. I have memorized many lists of many kinds, but never text of any length, and the need for that is where my journey began. So after going through your introductory videos, I did a hunt on Kindle, ebooks, found your book, How to Learn and Memorize Poetry. That reinforced the memory palace concept further. I did a 10-room layout of my house and put a few memory stations in each room. Then I found a poem that I liked and I thought was graphic and I felt an emotional tie with." Now notice here, a poem you liked, felt an emotional tie with, and you know, those are clues to what you should do. Find information that's meaningful to you and that will improve your life. So he says, then my first study of building and laying out my first memory palace took me a week or so of drawing and redrawing and figuring out what was being asked. I recorded this memory palace in a notebook as you suggested. Then the poem by Dylan Thomas, Do Not Gently Go Into That Good Night, took only 3 days of a few half-hour studies each day to memorize. I've read this poem 100 times and did not know how to keep it in memory. I was tickled by this that a few days later when I met with some friends, I asked them to listen to me rehearse the poem. What fun. This journey into memory began with a need to memorize a 2-page script. Remembering grocery lists, random items, and even numbers seems easy compared to this little speech. Memorizing script is so alien to me now. I am looking forward to being able to do this. I attached the pics of the Memory Palace poem project. Thanks for the lessons, Ray. So listen, this is something that if you don't have the free course, please take it because it will help you a great deal. And if you haven't given a thumbs up yet, give Ray a thumbs up. This is an amazing accomplishment. 3 days, 1 poem. And it's not an easy poem, I can tell you that. So show your support and congratulations to Ray. You'll find that that is absolutely something that, you know, when you get involved, when you start to engage and help other people and congratulate them, that will also trigger things in your own brain in a performance sense. So don't be silent on success. And so Ray actually sent, he said he was keeping a journal, but he also sent this image here, or his memory palace here, and he sent this one as well. So a dry erase board is also cool. I've made memory palaces on dry erase boards many, many times, and so that's a cool way to do it. But I really like this one that he shared, and you know, there's many, many ways to draw memory palaces. And one of the things, if we just go back, I want to show you something that's really, really critical here for you to understand. He said, it took me a week or so of drawing and redrawing and figuring out what was being asked. And, you know, sometimes people say, well, you know, I need more examples and I need this, that, and the other thing. And the reality is no, you don't. What you need to do is you need to take action. And there's a reason why that this training is designed the way that it is. And there's something called example addiction. And example addiction is people who like get a mnemonic example. I'm going to share with you a mnemonic example today that you know is going to contradict what I'm saying. But I'm thinking of like maybe a 1 mnemonic example per live stream policy or something. But I don't want to create mnemonic example guzzlers because it's not what helps you. What helps you is exactly this, is figuring out what was being asked. The only way you're ever going to get the results is by taking action. And so I applaud all people who dive in and take action, and I've designed it so that, you know, that's what I hope that you do. Because if you don't, it's just information, and it's data that people will save for later. So Steve is here. Hello, Steve. Thanks for saying hello. Way to go, Ray, says Steve. Thanks for cheering him on. Giordano Bruno is here. My God, man. It's good to see you. Thank you for saying hello. I love this. I love that Giordano Bruno is here. I think that is a good sign indeed. So thumbs up too for Giordano Bruno being here. Those of you who do not know Giordano Bruno, you're in for a big treat. Look him up, and you're going to absolutely love knowing him. All right, so Michael gives his thumbs up. Oban gives the thumbs up. Bernie says, well done, Ray. MPC2 says 3 thumbs up. Excellent. Alla guten Dinge sind drei. Reclaiming Life is here. Privyet. Privyet. Good to see you. Reclaiming Life says the free course at /snowman will help you defeat the evil Dr. Frost, who is represented by a snowman. Yeah, the evil Dr. Forget. And Steve says the Nolan abides. Indeed. So I love when we can be all obscure and have these insider references and so forth. That is wonderful. That gives me such feelings of hope for the future. And I know we started on a bit of a downer, but it's important, you know, to not always dodge the real deal stuff. And so this is just great that the Nolan does indeed abide. Excellent, excellent. You know, also there were some posts on the Magnetic Mary Method forum about the John Michael Greer translation of On the Shadows of the Ideas, or De Umbris Iderum. Really what we want to do is, you know, have these discussions, but I really encourage people to, if you're not already on the forum, to get involved and so forth, but also to bring your best scrutiny and so forth, because there's kind of like a wishful thinking about, you know, oh, if only we could speak with Bruno and all that sort of stuff. That's called the intentional fallacy. And with, you know, all the love in my heart, I don't think we're ever going to get that. And the point I think Bruno would make is not to create attachments around the teacher, but rather to see that all the best teaching, as Gary Weber puts it in Happiness Beyond Thought, is through abandonment, essentially. So check that out if you haven't. Reclaiming Life says, this is the first time that you've seen Giordano Bruno in your live cast and not just the podcast. A real blessing. Well, yeah. You know, this is the kind of thing that you couldn't actually have such an imagination to stage. I wish I would have thought of it. Not that I'm a person prone to staging anything. I'm not. But it is one of those things that is just like, why didn't I think of starting an account called Bruno for the purposes of potentially, you know, having advocates from the past. And now it'd be cool if people went out and like had all the characters from the history of memory showing up on these live streams. For those of you who have no idea what we're talking about, go to magneticmarymethod.com/Bruno. Listen to Scott Gosnell talk to us on that interview about the wonderful Giordano Bruno. And also we have a live stream about the John Michael Greer translation of Bruno. And I've got some work coming out on that as well, which is aided by both Scott Gosnell and John Michael Greer's work, and some other people. There's scholars on Bruno that many people are not aware of, and really the goal with Bruno, and my references to that conversation on the forum that you might want to check out, there are tools in Bruno that are going to be very, very effective for you if you apply them and don't get too hung up on, you know, fantasies and wishful thinking about what it might mean if you had more historical context and data and all that sort of stuff. That's great for personal enjoyment, but our goal and our focus, as stubborn as I might be, and some people say I am as stubborn as Bruno, which is a great compliment, although I don't know him personally, and I don't know the extent to which that he was stubborn, or that I would even want to necessarily be so closely associated with anybody else when there's me here, you know, and you here, so we can just be ourselves. But his stubbornness got him into hot water, and I don't want to repeat that whatsoever, because it's not necessary. But what we really need to do is find the tools in Bruno and see how they relate to our practice and what we're doing with our practice. So, just to show again Ray's wonderful, beautiful memory palaces here. if you have had an accomplishment, please let us know so we can share it with other people to encourage people. One of the things that is very clear to me is I can sit here and talk all day about all the wonderful things that I do with my memory every day. But what really matters is what you're doing. And if you can support the cause with putting your face and your name and your memory palaces to encourage others to take action, then that would be amazing. That would be wonderful. And the more we get, the better it will be. And it is the ultimate way to pitch in, really, to help encourage people. Because, 3 days here from Ray to memorize a poem this complex. I don't know if you know this poem, but it is not that easy of a text in 3 days. And I know Adolfo is here. Adolfo has been doing amazing scores in his exams. And, it's because he's building and developing competence with these skills. And then some of the things that we teach in the mastermind and so forth, they make total sense instantly because he's got an existing level of competence. So if these things are happening to you, please send in your stories of success. And I really, really, want to be sharing more and more of them. We're going to put this on our testimonials page. And there are many, many ways to draw memory palaces, and the whole point is to take action and to find ways to not only take action, but to take it consistently, because what's going to happen is your brain will develop a chemical called myelin, and that's very, very important in the formation of habits, especially when you're getting dopamine spikes from accomplishment, real meaningful accomplishment that comes from you deserving it, from taking action. And then when you get dopamine and myelin together, you get other opioids that are mixed together, and you essentially get the gym effect. I don't really feel like going to the gym very much, but every day I have this thing of like, I got to get some exercise. I need some exercise. And it's partly because I've become addicted to the chemicals. And the same thing, I got to memorize something. I got to recite something from memory. And it's just a habit that is so bound together with these chemicals. So, if you want the tips and the tricks and all that sort of stuff, the tip and the trick and the hack is to sit there and do this consistently to build the chemicals that will create the discipline engine. And it's the most beautiful engine in the world because it builds itself and it provides its own fuel. And these opioids, man, they're better than any drugs. They're better than any drugs. You feel so good all the time from consistent practice. And of course, there are other things involved here, and we'll talk about some of them today. But I want to really, really help as many people be inspired to just take action and to take it consistently and get results like Ray. And Adolfo's stories are incredible. And so like the more we have, the better to keep this grassroots community growing, and to do it without needing to do it on the shaky foundations of a heavily politicized internet. So I don't know if you're following the things that are going on. I certainly am. It's morally troubling when someone like Sam Harris pulls off, one of the most funded people on the internet, pulls off a platform that isn't even worth, mentioning by name right now. These are scary, dark times. And I did a Patreon experiment for a different body of knowledge that I was teaching in film studies, and it never felt right. And I just completely abandoned it and deleted it probably about a year ago because things are just not right with what's going on there. I guess I did mention what what I didn't want to mention, but in any case, this is today's topic: how to stop saying stupid things in 2019. And chances are you'll probably have forgotten if you even noticed. And so now the trick is to then myself use the tools we're going to talk about today, because you can sometimes start to feel a little bit awkward and odd, and you don't need to, because most people have forgotten, assuming they even paid attention in the first place. And so that is what this issue is that I wanted to start with today. And that is really these mental cognitive biases. They're causing you to punish yourself because they either give you overconfidence that you know what other people are thinking about what you're doing, to underconfidence in yourself and the value of your thoughts and your thinking. So this is not good, right? These biases where you think that people have actually paid that much attention to what you've said that you start punishing yourself, this is not good, because some people get overconfident about it. They get overconfident that people think that what they're saying has impacted them to a larger degree than it actually has. Or, and this is really, really strange, like it's related to something called the Dunninger effect, which has a different title than this. Let's look it up. Dunninger hypothesis, Dunninger-Kruger. It's this idea, and it's kind of like not fully understood because it comes from a different place, but it has to do with the idea that people have this superiority that they don't actually have. They misrepresent, they misjudge their position in the world, and so people have low ability tend to think that they're actually more competent than they are. And then the sad thing is that people who have perfectly good ability think that they're less competent than they are. I'm not sure if I said that correctly, but it's really, really sad. It's really, really sad that this happens. And as we see the success of all these platforms, they seem to think that they're better at what they're doing than they think they are. And then that gives them a God complex. It gives them a groupthink. It gives them this pluralistic ignorance, as it's sometimes called, where you sort of start to begin to think that your thoughts are all great, and that you just have an inability to actually think and empathize and run through the ideas of others. So what I want to talk about today is how to avoid getting into these traps, how to avoid getting into these traps of pluralistic ignorance and all of these things that are cognitive biases that will absolutely destroy you. So there's this phenomenon where people just they will, it's herd mentality and groupthink, where people will they'll privately disagree but go along with the herd, with the masses, and they'll do it because they think that people place more value on their individual thoughts than anybody actually does, right? And it's really, really bad. So there's all kinds of terms, Dunninger-Kruger effect, that we want to look into, pluralistic ignorance, groupthink, and so forth. At the end of the day, what we just want to do is, obviously know about the terms, but we want to have better tools in how we engage with the world. And so we're going to talk about them today, but I want to catch up with our chats here. So Reclaiming Life is saying, if you guys aren't familiar with John Michael Greer, he loves intellectual dumpster diving and the results are amazing. Awesome. Yeah, definitely check out his stuff. For sure. I want to get him on the podcast at some point, specifically to talk about memory, of course, but conversations go where they go. Adolfo is on vacation visiting Navy buddies and has been able to teach them in 2 days of the major and Memory Palace creation. They're shocked how quickly they are able to retain information now. That's great, Adolfo. I want to pause on that for a minute because you're doing the perfect thing, right? It's the perfect circle. So you're learning better the techniques for yourself because you're translating them into explanation and you're translating them into action. And so what that's going to do is it's going to give you better understanding. I mean, you might already have a great, profound understanding, but it's then going to, it's another form of mental rotation, which we talk about a lot, and its importance. So you're mentally rotating it, and you're mentally rotating it every single time. When you treat each individual learner on their own, you rotate in your mind differently for that person and then for the next person and the next person. It may be the subtlest, slightest difference, but it's a difference nonetheless. And we know that repetition is always difference, right? It has to be, because it's not the same thing that it was before. And so you're developing memory reserve. You're developing competence as an explainer, which leads to all kinds of wonderful things. And then, of course, you have the effect that these people, a certain percentage of them anyway, will go out into the world and they will start to use these techniques in ways that improve their own competence, which then enables them to improve their surroundings. And it just starts small and the ripple effect can be massive and huge. And even if it isn't massive and huge, it doesn't really matter because it's going to be massive and huge just for you in the context of your own life. And the benefits may be imperceptible, but they're there even just in your brain chemistry. And there's probably a way to put measurements on that because the more you do it, the more you develop competence. And those competence comes from actual brain structure chemical changes, which I'm sure that if you don't already know, you will know in your line of study. And so it's a beautiful, beautiful thing to see. So I honor you for that and congratulate you and thank you for, you're already a person of service for your nation, and now it's for the world in ways that it goes as a wonderful supplement to what you've already done in the battles of the mind and memory. So thank you very, very much. And a lot of people, they're into this stuff called the law of attraction. And here's the thing. When you just follow the law of action, you don't need the law of attraction because attraction happens naturally anyway. And it can be very, very laser targeted. So wonderful, wonderful to see you here. And thank you for what you're doing and will continue to do and have done, and how that, everything comes together in that beautiful way that it does. So Steve says he memorized John Michael Greer's Lolian style questions from the Shadows appendix today. Great. There are many more questions that we can elaborate from that, so I'm working on that in some ways. And some thumbs down to what's been going on the internet there. Steve has a great point here. What's a good talk among friends if you can't put your foot in your mouth once in a while? That's right. That's right. Marilyn Manson had a great response along those lines once upon a time, but I'm sure that if you watch his interviews, you'll have seen it. We don't need to repeat it here, but anyway, it comes to mind. And he's a great, strange figure to have in your memory work, to be sure. All right. So Matthew is here. Thanks for saying hello, Matthew. Good to see you. Reclaiming Life says, we're all friends here. We's all friends here. Yeah. Great. Well, we's and you's all, that's interesting. We have something connected to that coming up in a minute here. Steve says you have to achieve a certain level of knowledge to recognize how little you know, or as the proverb goes, too little learning is a dangerous thing. Great. You're definitely on point because proverbs are coming up here too. Claiming Life says, if I ever disagree, I'll tell you straight up. Excellent. That's what we need. I mean, there's no problem with disagreements, right? And I mean, where would we be if we didn't have the basis to mentally rotate, the different options? The difference is are you actually doing something to be able to adequately explain the other's position? And if you're not, then you're in trouble, right? Because if you're reacting to things that you can't explain, then that's not good at all, and it just gets worse. It gets worse and worse and worse. So Steve says the same man cannot step in the same river twice, and Reclaiming Life says unless he runs really fast. Rasmus is here. Good to see you, Rasmus. Thanks for saying hello. Adolfo says, am I ever going to hold a lecture in the States? It's possible. It's possible. We'll see what happens. We'll see what the future brings. I used to live in the U.S. Well, you know that. And I did do a lot of lectures already in the United States when I taught at Rutgers. But who knows what the future will bring. Reclaiming Life says Manson's interviews are impeccable. Marilyn Manson, yeah, he's a real well-spoken guy. I like that guy. Let's see here. So disagreements within intellectual pursuits are the foundation for expanding awareness, as Reclaiming Life says. Yeah, absolutely. And, it's not even just disagreements. And we're going to talk about something that's really, really important, a resource everybody should know and understand and go through at least once. It's not just about disagreement, but it's also about understanding the nature of discourse itself, what a discussion is, and what it means to open a discourse, because there are forces that open discourses and there are forces that close discourses. And we always want to understand in this that we are all subject and suspect to potentially falling into groupthink. We all have this. Like, it's just in the nature of the brain. And so, as Steve said here, you have to recognize how little you know, right? And that is the goal. That's the goal, is not to... That's what science is. Science is not certainty. Science is the demonstration of evidence. that supports claims, so long as the evidence supports claims. And when things no longer are in support of those claims, then we need to change. Anything else is pseudoscience, right? And we'll talk about that a little bit deeper in a minute. Steve says, when I heard Manson, I assumed Charlie. Yeah, no, I don't. You know, if you want to get into your cultural history, obviously Charles Manson is a figure to look at comprehensively. And certainly there's rhyme and reason to why that this musician put Marilyn and Manson together. And I think it's quite brilliant, actually, in how adaptation works. Incidentally, I gave a course at university on adaptation as a act of culture, as something that's very, very central to what humans are and how they behave. So I might release that course, actually. I've certainly prepared the material into the form that is almost ready to be published as a book. It works with film as the prime example, but the larger thing has to do with why are some characters transmitted throughout history the way that they are. And I think you find some really fascinating ideas there. A lot of them are wrong, but they're still compelling to go through. And so right and wrong are not always the thing to focus on, but rather what are the ideas and the discussions that are being generated here. And one of the problems with groupthink is that they're trying to shut down the possibility to have the discussion when words come up, right? And everything is words in some sense when it comes to how that we communicate to each other. So it is very, very interesting. Reclaiming Life says Charles Manson was perplexing. Marilyn Manson was astounding when he put the name together with Manson with Marilyn. Yeah. I mean, one of the reasons that comes to my mind is that they're both, what would we say, photogenic in some sense. They're both wildly photographed. They're both followed mindlessly. They both had a strong message that either implicit or explicit that had to do with some of humanity's basest impulses. And they had these tragedies either willfully or unwillfully happen to them. And there's just a kind of a celebrity longing and being thrust into celebrity and so forth that is an interesting paradox here, a very, very interesting paradox. So, but we only get to think those thoughts when we help defend a society that doesn't fall into groupthink. But one of the things that we need to always recognize is that we're always in danger of falling into groupthink. All of us, everybody. And I have never been free of it myself, and I don't suspect that I ever will be free, because you need to practice the freedom from it. And memory training is one of the ways to practice that, because you're able to really, really reason through information from the benefit of your mind. So if you haven't taken the free course at magneticmemorymethod.com/YT, please register now. If you're here and you're new here and you're not subscribed to this channel, please get subscribed to the channel and hit the thumbs up if you're just joining us now, hitting the wrong button here. And let me know where you are in the world, what you're doing, what you're thinking, and if you have any questions about memory or anything like that, pop them in the chat. And I want to carry on here with some of the things that we can do to stop ourselves from saying stupid stuff, right? So we now have defined the problem, I think, quite nicely. Let's think about what we can do. We'll start general and we'll get more and more specific as we go. So we want to avoid generalizations, right? People, they use sweeping generalizations all the time. Everybody does. I do too. And you just practice catching yourself. The more you can practice catching yourself, the more you'll reduce this habit of generalizing. So it's just a practice. It's not anything that, is going to be perfect or somehow something that you'll completely avoid. It's part of language, generalizing. And generalizations can be a tool. So there's a place for them. But the kinds of generalizations I want to avoid are things like the word always, right? And you can think of it in terms of cultural discussions, political discussions. People like, oh well, they always come back to the same thing in the way that they behave, whether you're talking about this party or that party, or in a personal relationship. You always say that. Well, even if it's true, or even if you have the perception that it's true, can it possibly be true? Like always is never. Why do we know that always is never? Because time is just too big, right? And we don't have the mental capacity to track every single utterance, and it's just not possible. So always is a dangerous word. As Reclaiming Life is saying here, everyone, they say, people say, pile them in. If you have ideas of generalizations and whatnot, we want to get rid of them. Another one is distortions, like distorting what people say, and we've seen some in 2018, we've seen some pretty nasty distortions. Like, so what you really mean is blah, 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 blah. If you saw the conversation that I'm talking about, then you know what I mean. And it's just terrible, the distortions that come, because distortions are often coupled with generalizations, right? So what you really mean is that, and always, like it's just, it's really, really not good. So avoid generalizations. Start to watch your own speech. Start to watch your own thinking. And this is just an incredible way to reduce suffering in your life, is to not be a generalizer, not be a universalizer. It's just not possible. It's just not true. Steve says, universal modifiers are awful, makes almost anything one tries to say instantly false. It only takes one counterexample to disprove an all or always. Right. And there's almost, shall we say it? There's almost always an exception to the rule, right? I had a professor at the European Graduate School named Agamben, and he talks about the states of exception. And that's really interesting work that he does. Ausnahme, as they say in Germany. And there's always a state of exception. Or is there always? I don't know. I don't want to make my own mistake, but really, I don't want to make the mistake that I'm talking against. But isn't it the case that if there is one thing that's always true, it's that there is always a state of exception, whether that state of exception is created by force or by chance or by luck or whatever. Isn't there always something there? And what is it that we need to be observing about the states of exception? We probably need to be focusing a great deal on those states of exception, because therein lies often the real crimes, the real power structures that are problematic, instead of the fantasy straw man problems that people put on the table. So this is really, really, really important. So we got to keep this in mind. William's here. Good to see you, William. Do you think saying in general makes generalizing more acceptable? Well, that's a great question, William. Thanks for that. I mean, it depends. It depends on how you're using it, right? Because in rhetoric, people can use it with rhetorical force that has a negative intent. So in general, wouldn't you agree that there are always states of exception? Well, there might even be an exception to that, right? And so we're always rhetorical. We're always rhetorical creatures. One of the things that I aim to work on in 2019, testing the interest, and I think there's a lot of interest so far, in a course on critical thinking, but not just a random, course in critical thinking, but one that's coming out of the memory tradition. Because a lot of the books that preserved the Memory Palace, for example, they were actually about rhetoric. And rhetoric is essentially about the organization of words in ways that persuade you to accept positions, to influence people, and to persuade people, right? And we're always persuading each other. So rhetoric is essentially the arrangement of words to create better acts of persuasion. So I think it has to do, William, to how you're using in general towards what outcome. And so, I mean, it's not that generalization is in and of itself a bad, but how you're using it. Like if you think about, I should have had a slide about this, but if you think about being a chess master, right? And you're thinking of how you're going to be a number of steps ahead of a person that you're debating or that you're having an intellectual conversation with, you want to watch for when they're saying in general, right? You want to watch for that, because then that's a way for you to then say, look, part of the problem is that it's not only that you're generalizing, but you're using generalization as a rhetorical tool to lead to a conclusion that clearly has some kind of end in mind, right? And so what is that end, and whose benefit does it serve? One of the most powerful tools, and unfortunately this thinker has been slighted a lot lately. He might be getting his just desserts, but at the end of the day, I don't think so, because he's dead, quite frankly. And so we can take his biography, as some people that I otherwise admire and respect are doing, and they can take his political context and they can smear the value that is in there, the tools that have nothing to do with the individual, and then they can rob those tools of value. So he's on a slide coming up here, but that person is Michel Foucault. And he's been smeared a lot recently by Jordan Peterson, who is essentially making ad hominem attacks against a lot of these people. And, you know, like I said, they may have their just desserts. I don't know. I don't care, because critical thinkers, true critical thinkers who you know, have their ducks in order, they're not going to worry that much about the historical context of whatever terrible things a philosopher did or didn't do. And they're going to be able to seize upon the value of the tools in those thinkers' thoughts and what they were saying, and what's useful about those tools. So Foucault urged us to ask, and yes, there's a lot of there's garbage in everybody's swimming pool, you know, and it needs to be cleaned out. So whatever, we can focus on that, or we can focus on the value of the tools. One of the tools that he gave us was to think about whose outcome is served, right? Whose outcome is served when this or that is structured in a particular way. This is very, very valuable. And, you know, he may have not done it the right ways in all the time. He may not have used all the best examples, but at the end of the day, it's the tool that matters, is thinking about, if this is true, and if this person rhetorically can persuade others to accept this position, what interest is served? This is what Foucault really, really brought to the table in a way that was very, very impactful and forceful. Did it backfire? Well, yes, I think so. And why did it backfire? Well, one of the reasons is that people are not using their fullest powers of critical thinking, because they have agendas and they have outcomes that they want served. And we're going to talk about how to get past that, because it's there's a very, very useful tool for getting past the need to have your outcomes served, and just focus on the value of the tools and using the tools with discernment, and not making logical errors that smear them, which is especially bad when you're in a position to be smeared so quickly yourself. So that's one thing that I see happening, even if some of these people, like the person I just mentioned, might be getting his just desserts after he's dead, right? Which means that he's not getting anything. He's dead. Like, it doesn't really matter. We don't need to go smashing him with a hammer for what he may or may not have done inappropriately during his life. Well, you're just opening up the criticism that you're going to receive when you're attacking a dead person that way, when you yourself are on the world scene with tools, and it just doesn't make any sense. So I think Peterson's doing great work. It's one of those exceptions to the rule that we'll just have to let fly, but not without commentary, because it is not good. It's not healthy to use ad hominem or personal attacks against any philosopher from the past in a way that would cause people to be dissuaded from the actual tools, because that could happen to Jordan, and it does happen to Jordan Peterson too, and it's absolutely ridiculous. It's not about agreeing with every single tit and toddle in someone's conversation. It's about, do you actually understand what is being said there? Have you done your due diligence and actually paid the price of the time, the focus, and the attention to understand, so that you can avoid the generalizations and you can avoid things like untestable claims and so forth. Anyway, that's a big long speech, but it really, really concerns me. So, I can only, and I admit I'm a little bit triggered when I hear people throwing out some of these thinkers, because it's not that it's incorrect that they belong to movements that were dangerous and had dangerous elements and have led to negative outcomes. Peterson's criticism is absolutely correct. What is not good, though, is throwing the baby out with the bathwater and somehow making it seem as though every single tool there is useless. Because actually, Foucault is really forwarding the project, and so is Jacques Derrida, the project of Nietzsche, in ways that actually make Nietzsche more useful. And Nietzsche is forwarding, in an odd way, but still a powerful way, the project of Plato in ways that are useful, and make Plato more useful, and make Aristotle more useful for that matter as well. So really, really important. Let's see here. So I hope that ultimately answers your question, William. A great one. And ultimately, when we talk about Nietzsche and the way that his tools can be maximized and so forth, we want to avoid untestable claims. And, Nietzsche might not have been the greatest demonstrator of this, but he was a great person who did what he could to make us or help us understand what a fact actually is, right? And what like the Gay Science is a great book if you haven't read it. It's just incredible. And I was very, very lucky and fortunate to take a course in Nietzsche with Friedrich Alfers, who is a major German scholar. And he has the Nietzsche chair at the European Graduate School, but he's also at New York University, I believe. And so reading Nietzsche is one thing, but being able to study with the great Fred Alfers, wow, amazing. That was one of my favorite courses of all time that I ever took. And really helps you unpack what Nietzsche is really saying, because I was learning German at that time, and really being able to read Nietzsche in German is great. But one of the things that's really, really important there is the understanding of what science really is, what empiricism really is. And it is the production of evidence to help us validate or discredit a claim that is a moving target, right? And so this is very, very important. Like, one of the things that, Nietzsche did a lot of things with puns and jokes and riddles, and some people use that to his discredit. It certainly dated him for sure, and it's going to, he thought he was writing for 100 years in the future, but I don't know. One of the issues there is that we're seeing that people are having a harder and harder time actually being able to read anything or listen to anything without snap judgments, because of how social media is training them to have opinions before they've actually understood what they're having an opinion about. So I don't know if Nietzsche is writing for the future or not. It may be increasingly hard for people with digital amnesia to even get through one of his books, let alone decode all the riddles and the puns. But Zeno's paradox comes up a lot. Like, we had it today. Reclaiming Life and Steve, I think if I look back here, we're joking about, you can't step in the same river twice unless you run really quickly. Well, Nietzsche was really switched on to this, and it's really understanding the emergent nature of reality, which is built from what would later some thinkers like Deleuze would come to think of as assemblage, right? So it's emerging in assemblage, and things are, as Deleuze and Guattari put it, they're territorializing, and then they're deterritorializing. So as the world emerges, which is doing right now, like, we're in real time, this is real, hello. It's being memorized by computers as we speak. But we are now territorializing together. We're assembling in real time together. And that's enabling us to create new things. Even if the newness of those things is really adapting from existing properties, and we're reconfiguring them, even if only ever slightly, but they're emerging into the future. And so what is true about anything that we're saying is actually changing in each person's brain chemically as we engage in discussion. And so that means that what has the potential to be true becomes truer and truer the more discernment and understanding of what science really is, which is the accumulation of evidence that either supports or discredits claims. Well, then you get closer and closer to having certainty and predictability that actually warrants you having any sort of comfort or joy, right? The gay science is about the joy in your own knowledge, the knowledge that you have because it's on the bedrock foundations of the only bedrock foundations you're ever going to get, right? Which is an emergent thing in the real time, right now, happening at every moment. And so we really, really want to avoid untestable claims because we'll never get that certainty. We'll never be able to be scientific with them in that beautiful sense. And we'll never be able to properly engage with other scientists that are devoted to what science really, really is. And we'll never develop the tools or competence with discussion with science. And we'll never be good contributors, at least in the way that we could be if we understood these things. We'll be pseudoscientists. We'll be the problem rather than the solution because we will not have a dedication to the emergence of what is going to come and what is always in the state of becoming. And this is another thing back to Peterson where I can't understand why he throws the baby out with the bathwater, because he himself is saying these things. He himself is saying them so clearly when he talks about the logos. And his definition of the logos is so much, it resonates so much with the emergence of factuality, of truth as a thing that is in development, and the only way to participate in its development honestly, ethically, and in a productive way that actually will help you and help others is to do it scientifically and to focus on things that actually can be tested, that can be known, and to really avoid or at least treat with caution those things that can not. So this is really, really important to understand. Listen, if you're joining us now, hit the thumbs up. Let me know in the chat where you are in the world, what you're doing, what you're thinking. Is this useful for you, or is this just, noodling around with ideas? Another thing that is really, really important is to avoid self-deprecation. So if you want to be a better thinker, nothing is more dangerous to you than saying, well, this might be a stupid question. Why would you start like that? You have a question, own it. Be proud of the fact that you're a person who has questions. You don't need to hit the ground running with a, well, this might be a stupid question, or you probably heard this question 1,000 times before. Why come like a dog with your tail between your legs when you are a person who has the wherewithal to ask a question? This is the most amazing, beautiful thing in the world. Doesn't mean that there are no stupid questions. Certainly there are stupid questions, but damn, I'd rather be a person with a stupid question than a person with no questions at all, right? Doesn't that make sense? Because unfortunately, the sad thing is that a lot of people have questions that they don't have the courage to ask, and that really, really sucks. That really, really sucks. It's the classroom effect. It's mentioned in You Are Not So Smart, so please read that book. But there's this effect where there's a classroom full of people. The teacher will say, are there any questions? And maybe one or two people will actually say that they do, when research shows that the majority of the class has questions. The majority of the class is confused, and they just don't have the courage and the wherewithal to ask the question, right? And then going back to what we talked about earlier with the Dunning-Kruger effect. Sorry, got to drink some water here. And all these cognitive biases, what we have is that the people who ask all these questions, they come at it with this ridiculous self-deprecation that is a rhetorical tool that, they use because they've got an agenda in mind often, and they're trying to make themselves look better by being falsely modest or whatever they might be doing there. There can be different ways that they're using it, but since we're rhetorical creatures and we're always rhetorical, this is not a good thing at all. So we need to just not use that. We need to not use that. And believe me, everybody has the impulse to do it. There's nothing wrong with having the impulse to do it, but you can catch yourself and stop yourself doing it, and just be proud that you're a person who has questions, and ask your question. Ask your question. Who cares what anybody else is thinking about your question? They're going to forget that you asked it in the first place within 2 to 3 seconds, if not 2 to 3 minutes, which might be better or worse. You never know. But you're here for you, right? And you're here for how you can improve yourself and how you can then take your self-improvement to improve others. And so ask your question, and let asking your question be the thing that guides you towards asking even better questions and better questions. So I want to say hello to Hadi from Tunisia. All right. So I have a former family member, divorce and all that stuff, but I still am very fond. He was in Tunisia. He lived there for some time. Great to have you here. I never did get to visit there, but I have a mental image somehow anyway through my my former wife's uncle. William says there are no stupid questions, only stupid people. I'm not sure I believe that, actually. I don't think there are stupid people. I think that there are stupid behaviors. There's ignorance, and ignorance creates those stupid behaviors. And I think there's luck, and there's chance and fortune and all those things that puts people in positions they wouldn't have chosen if they were otherwise. Now, at the end of the day, you can circle back and arrive at that same sort of statement, but I don't think it's useful at the end of the day. And the reason why is that we all have the same sort of basic brain structure. We certainly, more and more of us, have the opportunity to engage in conversations that will help stimulate the growth of those structures. And I don't think that there are stupid people. At the end of the day, I think that there's just a wealth of intelligence that gets locked into paths that actually have such huge potential to find better expression. And that's one of the reasons why I do what I do, is to help people find better expression, to help myself find better expression, and to test my own claims. And I test them all the time. Everything is subject to scrutiny, and one of the ways that I am able to test them and put them to scrutiny is through discussion. All right, so Reclaiming Life says, Peterson's definition of logos is so much more based on the straight-up Greek, not the way that Christianity has made it as a result of the Septuagint. Yeah, but at the same time, here's the thing, is that his definition of logos is contextual to what it is that he's doing. So it's not particularly consistent. And that's, I don't know, but it's one of those things that makes it a problem, but an interesting problem, one that helps create conversations. And I don't know actually that it's in the nature of the topic to ever come up with a consistent sort of way of using that term. So we need to be very, very aware of people's agendas, what they're trying to do, why they're trying to do it, and we need to, have a comprehensive view and make judgments on a case-by-case basis. Overall, it gets a pass because I see a bigger thing going on there from my perspective, but it is disconcerting. And the great sign to me is that Peterson himself is disconcerted by the fact that he's even fallen into this position. And the fact that he is in the position that he's in is a great proof of concept of his own teaching, which is essentially, I think, a better hero's journey kind of structure. Or maybe it's not even better, it's supplementary. I mean, I wouldn't even be, this is the thing when you understand about memory, is that you couldn't even have a concept of better or progress or supplement if certain things were not already in your memory, in your mind, right? In your memory reserve, in your existing competence. But the great thing that Peterson shares, I think, is the thoughts about what existing mental competence is, and how that you use that to shine light into the darkness and have meaningful missions that you undertake that you actually can win because you understand your existing competence. So that's what self-authoring is all about. And It's a very, very interesting program. I've had something like this for years already in the self-improvement supercharger, and it's been influenced by a source that I'll share with you a little bit later today, which is similar to his own world of psychology, applied psychology in clinical practice. So let's see here. Bernie says, self-deprecation can sometimes help when dealing with egomaniacs. An agenda is easier to sell with. Yes, well, agreed, Bernie. Thank you for sharing that. Because it's a rhetorical tool, right? It just people use it without really realizing the rhetorical flavor that it brings to things. But certainly, well used in an elegant parry, it certainly can work. Although, even then, it sometimes comes out just unnecessary and disgusting. So pick your battles. I certainly sometimes go back in my mind and just think, that was pandering in a way that was unnecessary, and really it would have been better to just stand the ground instead of, a kind of self-deprecation, because it doesn't ultimately add as much as it might seem. And you're right that it can be a tool with egomaniacs, but I don't know. In retrospect, often there may have been better tools, but you can't go back anyway. But in retrospect is only so useful. But anyway, point taken. Thank you for that. James says, I'm guilty of using the "this might be a stupid question" statement. Right? Well, listen, James. Knowledge is a way of dispelling ignorance of what makes one guilty. You'd be surprised. And look, I don't want to get into like pseudo-scientific speculation and in the direction of woo-woo, but I think if you think it through, you'd be surprised by how much suffering things like that actually create. We'll talk about that in a minute. It's in my new book. I'm fully cognizant of it being speculative, but it's been a powerful thought tool for me, and approached scientifically, it is impactful. So we'll get to that in a minute. Let's see. William says, just joking, a South Park reference. All right. South Park is something I have enjoyed sparingly. My preference from those guys are things like Cannibal the Musical and Team America, but I never really got that much into South Park. So apologies if it went over my head, but I would certainly love to see which episode you're talking about so that I can perhaps be won over to the South Park world. Steve says, but Peterson's use of logos a reification? He uses it, I think, almost as if he's describing a physical force like gravity, when it's probably more like a psychological urge. Yeah, reification is a big problem there. I'm working a lot on this in my new book, because I think, how do we, this is the challenge of my new book, is like, how do we even begin to have a meaningful discussion about this without then just being accused of being religious, right? So I absolutely reject this whole notion of being religious, if that you feel these things in your life, because I certainly do feel them, and more, the more that I muck around with, more than muck around, but actually direct and focus on these activities using Sanskrit. And part of the reason that you feel it is because of the production of certain opioids in the brain. And so, one of Peterson's teachings is that when you have a mission that you actually can accomplish because it's based on your existing competence, right? You're going to experience a physical change in fitness. And I think that this would be borne out, and is borne out, by oodles of research, that people have health benefits when they put themselves through challenges that use the best of their existing competence so that they grow. And of course, this is going to create better sense of well-being. And it may well create thoughts in your mind that you are being guided, right? And so there's a double-edged sword here to this feeling of being guided. And I'm going to talk about this in the new book, because I've been guided to thoughts that were like, all your friends want you to kill yourself. Everybody will understand, in fact, that's what they want you to do, right? I've had that. And I've had other thoughts of guidance and all kinds of stuff that is just like, yeah, this is what you're doing, man. It's all like, yeah, totally in the great emergence of the great being of all things that are becoming what they will become. You can spin it any way that you want. At the end of the day, what we know to be true that can be testable is that brains that engage in certain activities, their chemical structure changes. A lot of it changes in this area right here. And a lot of it, how it changes, is in the production of opioids, dopamine, and myelin, and a bunch of other sort of chemicals, norepinephrine, and so forth. And that might create some pretty woo-woo strange ideas that feels like gravity's on your side. Maybe you can fly, right? And so what we need to do is we need to put a big whoa brakes on people who start to make a claim that this is the logos and it's all going to be yada, 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 yada. Sam Harris is a great voice of reason here, and I hope to contribute to that work in my new book. And I have certain spiritual experiences. William's here on the thing, William Gordon. He's done a lot of our the best photography that we have, and I talk with him at length about this, and I put the brakes on it every time, because at the end of the day, if I had the budget to go and get my brain scanned, I went to the doctor and they said, well, that's not covered by your health insurance, and maybe we'll put the budget together. It wouldn't really make sense though, because I didn't get my brain scanned beforehand. Although maybe I think I have had my head scanned. Maybe we can find something in the past and get those records back. But it still wouldn't be a fair test. But in any case, I'd love to see what my brain looks like, because I'm pretty sure that a lot of the sensations that I've been having, they perfectly resonate with what you would expect from somebody who does these kinds of meditations consistently, day after day after day after day, because of what we know about chemical changes. And so these things can make you feel closer to being itself, to your animal sense of being in nature. Like, there's no two ways about it. But then to speculate and take these steps that somehow, now God is real and there's actually this God that is directing you and having a personal relationship with you. This is really interesting. And what's so interesting about it to me is that if I say what I really think, there's this latent church training that I have from when I was a kid, which is sometimes called the God virus, right? Which is that, oh, maybe they were right. And if I say what I really think, that it can't possibly really be a God, I'm going to go to hell now, right? And the punishment is even going to be worse. That's a terrible, terrible thing. That's tantamount to child abuse, actually. That as a person of my age, almost 42 now, to be thinking, to even having the thought that these experiences that I'm having as someone in my 40s from daily meditation might be evidence of that my church upbringing somehow is kicking in, and that my putting it to scrutiny could lead to eternal punishment. That's that's the effect of child abuse, and I'm going to point it out very, very strongly in the new book, and try to do it without pointing fingers, because it's not my parents' fault that they subjected me to such maniacal training about the sufferings in hell. I'll tell you though, those guys belong to the realm of the evil Dr. Forget, so their suffering will be legendary, even in hell, I'm sure, if you get that reference, that quote. All right, Rishi is here. Hello, Rishi. Love that name. Thanks for saying hello. William, yeah, thanks. William asks and William answers. When are we scheduled to meet Peterson? 17th of February is, yes, indeed, that time. I'm going to have Maps of Meaning with me and get that signed, of course, which is going to be cool. Yeah, it's going to be great. So much gratitude to all those who make those things possible, who are here today. Steve says, I took ayahuasca and saw spirits. It doesn't mean spirits are real, but it may mean that brains who consume DMT are likely to have that experience. Yeah, I talk about this in what I've already written in the new book. Look, I took a lot of drugs when I was a kid. I took them when I was way too young, partly because, that's just the way things worked out. I was running free, running wild, as the J.G. Ballard novel called it, where the kids run wild. So this is, this may have had an effect. But Gary Weber, actually, he says he never took any of these drugs. And if you just look at the brain chemistry, you know, look, drugs are not really what drugs are. Drugs are a thing that stimulate the brain to create particular chemicals and yada yada. At least as far as I understand it. I'm not a neuroscientist or a drug specialist or anything like that. And so it stands to reason that you could potentially do some things that would cause the stimulation of some of these drugs that relate to psychedelics and so forth. And so because I have had those experiences, I can tell you anecdotally that, yeah, it is like I just developed this little button that's like, boop, you know, don't need weed, don't need mushrooms, don't need any of that stuff. We can go off to the races and we can go to the moon. We can have all kinds of little pictures and lights. And oh, yeah, all we got to do is sit down, meditate, do some breath withholding, chant some Sanskrit, and away we go. And it just like switches this light on in your head that just lasts for hours and hours and hours. But that is not licensed to then start making a bunch of untestable claims and a bunch of nonsense and misguide people and create all kinds of nonsense in the world. So my real risk, my danger is that I want to be on the Sam Harris side of the game and get the best of the other world, but call a spade a spade. Die Dinge beim Namen nennen, I think is what the Germans call it. Name the thing by its name, or call a spade a spade. And I think that is what we need in today's world. And look, that doesn't mean we don't enjoy the woo-woo kind of stuff that happens to us. Enjoy. But it's not knowledge. It's not real knowledge if you then put a bunch of spooky ideas around it and so forth. And quite frankly, even though these little worries and fears come from my deep God virus religious training, it wouldn't be nearly as enjoyable if I didn't hold it to scrutiny. In The Science of Enlightenment, Shinzen Young says, you will have blissful experiences, and the real challenge is, are you willing to hold the blissful experiences to the same self-inquiry and scrutiny as you are the bliss? Because that's where the real rewards are. And he's, I think, in my own experience, he's 100% right. So you've got to be willing to hold the bliss to the same scrutiny that you hold all the junk that you're dealing with using these tools. Very, very important. Okay, so I think we've covered this. Let's check in with our chats here. Sorry if I missed anything, but we'll do oh, William here has a quote. Let's see. Everyone is a beautiful person that you can learn from, whether they are a prisoner on death row, homeless, without a shower for years, or an infant in the cradle. You can learn from them all. I love that. I love that. Thank you for sharing that. And it's so profound because every person is represented in your neurochemistry. That every person is you in that sense. And there's no woo-woo to that. They're you because they're being represented inside of your brain, your chemical, right? And so this is what a lot of these traditions mean about oneness and all things are connected and so forth. Of course they are. They're in your mind. They're in your brain, which is, you know, your mind is produced by your brain. Everything is chemically related so long as it's in your actual ability to be aware of it. That's why fate and chance and luck are so precious and so profound, and why we need to have gratitude and gratefulness for the things that we are lucky enough to have enter our awareness. And when bad things, unpleasant things, useless things come in, should we show a little bit of gratitude to them as well? Well, yes, with discernment, because we need to see them as tools, see them as stepping stones, and deal with them. And we probably, yes, should be grateful that we have those problems as well. So, you know, I've had lots of chronic pain, lots of issues throughout my life. And as odd as it sounds, I'm grateful for all of them. And you'll hear that again and again and again when you know, hear stories of triumph over things that people have been able to deal with in their lives. So, History of Philosophy is here. Hello. Thank you for saying hello. You are a sophomore at law school. The issue is that you study best in the university in South America. It's a lot of pressure to sound smart. This was helpful. Oh, that's great. The question is, should I dare to speak when it's accurate, or is it better to shut up sometimes? Yeah, well, yeah, it is better to shut up sometimes. It's discernment, right? You've got to pick your battles, and you've got to, you know, you've got to be able to, you got to be willing to take risks because you don't know what the outcome will be. So one of the things that this is all leading to is just be willing to let go of the outcome. You don't know what is going to happen. And so you get great peace by just being willing to accept whatever is going to be the outcome of the actions that you take. And even if you don't take action, you have to be willing to accept the result of not taking action, because everything is action. Not taking an action is an action. It will create some kind of response, or the non-response of the world will cause you to respond to the non-response. So this comes back to what we started with, which is the young people committing suicide because they're depressed, because they're not getting enough thumbs up or whatever on their stuff. That is a response to non-response, right? That is an action to a non-action. And it's very, very troubling. So whether you act or you don't act, whether it's better to shut up sometimes or it isn't better to shut up, the higher principle, the better thing to understand is be okay with the results of your action or your non-action, regardless of what comes up. This is really, really important. And Steve says here, yep, equanimity is greater than bliss. Exactly. And Steve also says, you are a different person to everyone you meet because no two people encode you the same. That is true too. And all the more reason why we shouldn't get hung up on what any individual thinks about us, because they will change over time as well. And it's really, really important. So let's see. So, and, history of philosophy is asking this particularly in the context of a class. Well, yeah, I mean, as you may have heard me say on these live streams before, is like, I'm trying to encourage you to interact, but I know that there's this thing. I'll say, hey, anybody have any questions? We already know that there's a percentage of people who will never speak. So pick your battles and say, I'm gonna accept the outcome of what happens either way. I'm gonna accept what happens if I don't ask a question that could have been answered here, could have led to an interesting question, or I'm going to accept what happens if I say something and it winds up turning me into a pariah. Just be willing to accept it. See what happens. At the end of the day, think about what really matters, what it is that you want to have happen as a outcome of your result, and just work with that. Work with that. And then that will be the answer, better than any person could generalize. Right? It's a case-by-case basis, and focus on what can be testable in as much as you possibly can, right? And sometimes in classrooms, you really are just looking for an ego stroke, right? Like what are you demonstrating? That you're an equal to the professor, or are you demonstrating that you are a contributor to the professor, and there's going to be payoffs and costs one way or the other? And just understand that life is a zero-sum game. You're going to die, so what does it really matter at the end of the day relative to your short-term and your long-term goals and the kind of person that you want to be in the world and what you're trying to achieve? So Reclaiming Life says, pick your battles, kick butt in the ones you're able to, and grow in knowledge and self-awareness from the ones you can't. Yeah, I think it's pretty simple that way. And Reclaiming Life says, what drugs are change in definition depending on who you ask. Well, yeah, but that doesn't change what drugs are. We want to avoid relativism here, right? So yes, what Timothy Leary says as drugs and what the legalese of governments call drugs changes, but there's also just common sense use of what the term drugs is. And the change there is not so relative, and so we got to put some caution on what kind of relativism we want to put here. And really, at the end of the day, does it matter if Timothy Leary has this particular definition if it doesn't reform what the government is doing? And if what the government is doing, and they make reforms based on what Leary says, if that just has this outcome that is completely undesirable, even if it seems desirable on the surface, then, was it worth it? And then it comes down to the difference between the micro individual and the macro of the society and so forth. And so it's really, really one of those things where it's the relative. We can't do too much with relativism in this case. There really is something that people mean when they talk about drugs, and its variation is pretty small. So you mentioned coffee here, and coffee is a great example. don't talk to me before I have my coffee. They're saying that they are unpleasant when they aren't on drugs. This is absolutely true. And I think this is a pretty common and well understood nature of this particular term. By the same token, what we want to think about, though, is to what extent does it matter to any of us that they are forced to, yes, that is a drug, and what is the hierarchy of drugs relative to their consequences in society? Now, you could make an argument that actually caffeine addiction is far more destructive in the large scheme of things than heroin. You could make that argument. I don't know how far that would go. I don't know how useful it would be, but we want to just, be cautious of any generalization that we would do around this. All right. So all of this is leading to wanting to just be as scientific as we possibly can, understanding science in the best possible way, seek evidence, and always have your baloney detection kit on hand. So I think that the origin of the baloney detection kit is Carl Sagan's The Demon Haunted World. And Michael Shermer talks a lot about the baloney detection kit. And so, you want to have these tools that help you with discernment, that help you rotate things in your mind quickly and reserve judgment on things that you may have said in any given moment, so that you're able to, process, reprocess, and essentially, to use the Carl Sagan, lingo, have reason, rationality, and science as a candle that you hold in the dark, right? And understand that the dark has a lot of wind in it that wants to blow out that candle. So you want to protect it. You want to protect it as much as you can. One of the ways that you do that, of course, is by taking the free course at magneticmemorymethod.com/YT. Why? Because it will help you remember what you learn, get it into long-term memory quickly, and enable yourself to actually be scientific, seek evidence, and remember what that evidence was, and then become a better citizen of the planet and feel better as a result and have better brain chemistry because of the contributions that you're able to make and how you are able to escape the evil Dr. Forget. Whoa-ha-ha. All right, everybody, I'm going to take a little bit of a break here, and I will be back in a few minutes. If you care to stick around, that is great. And if not, thanks for being here. It was great meeting with you. Feel free to chat amongst yourselves while I bring you this message. And we are back. Thank you, everybody, for your patience with that little pause. And so, obviously, what we want to do in order to remember more so that we're able to to have these better thoughts and so forth is to read widely. And reading widely is obviously of great benefit because you get a more expansive view of the world, history, philosophy, different perspectives, and things that you might not agree with should be read, so that actually when you disagree with them, you're able to frame what it is that they're saying, and be sure that you actually disagree with it, and explain the extent to which that you actually disagree with it. So that's really important. And then I highly recommend that you memorize something daily. Have a long project of things that you're going to memorize, and it might be you're going to read a book and memorize certain material from that book. It could be a language. It could be that as you learn the language, you're going to learn more about the culture and some of the dates of the country where that language is spoken, or the countries where that language is spoken. And, put something into your memory every day. And then put it into discussion. Discuss with people. Lots of meetup groups and so forth where you can go and look people in the eye, hear what they have to say what you have to say, percolate with the great richness of the chemicals that are created when you are with other people, rather than being online all the time. So what Jonathan Haidt was speaking about there is that this certain generation is now discussing with apps all the time, and they're not meeting other people, and this is tragic and sad. So we want to, meet other people and do what it takes. And you can have online discussions as well. I more and more encourage people to use their real names while they're on the internet, rather than this anonymous stuff. I think the anonymity is great. It has its place, it has its purpose, but it's getting abused in ways that are that are creating us all being under attack, and it's putting the freedom to have these discussions under attack, the way that anonymity is being used, while at the same time it's understandable that people want to be anonymous because of the ways that real people are being attacked and deplatformed and so on. So this is all the more reason why group discussion is so important, because the real wealth that anyone has in life is their contacts. It's their relationships at the end of the day. If all money melts overnight, what are you going to have? You're going to want to have relationships. If the internet goes down and all your relationships are online, what are you going to do with that? You can't get help from people you can't contact. And if you don't know the names of the people that you know, then you're going to be in trouble. So be sure that you have things in memory so you can contact others and you know them well. And that's very, very important. Now, I also am a very strong advocate and proponent of long-form content. And one of the reasons why that long-form content is so important and precious to me came up when I was in a interview yesterday with Carl Taylor on the Future of Humanity podcast. If you don't know the Future of Humanity podcast, he is preparing season 2 now. Really great. Check it out. And I'm really honored to be in season 2 when that comes out in the near future. And we were talking about why long-form content is so important. And I was saying it's an opportunity for you to mentally model multiple people's thoughts when they are, in particular, in a long-form setting, thinking out loud. So these wonderful debates that we're able to go through, we can play ping pong with ideas, and that actually helps us think better as we think along through the different positions. And he said, oh yeah, I've had this experience where, I used to learn online only, and then I started to learn in a particular setting with real people. And, as opposed to PDFs and video courses and so forth, actually sitting in longer form things, he started to have this experience of mentally modeling. Now, it doesn't mean you become those people. It doesn't mean you imitate them or anything like this. You actually start to, just have their tools, right? So you can get that from books as well, but you got to read the whole books. So USSR, that's what we used to use in my elementary school for uninterrupted, sustained, silent reading. Then you have, uninterrupted, silent, sustained listening, uninterrupted, sustained, silent viewing. I, do a lot of watching these YouTube discussions, but I don't really watch them. I, listen to them and take notes, often mind map what's going on with what they're talking about. Really enjoy being creative while listening, and it gets it more into memory, the key points, and it's a lot of fun. So that's really, really important. And another reason why it's important is because it helps you practice your attention span. And shrinking attention span is one of the reasons why people say stupid things. They speak in order to fill the void, in order to fill the silence, because they're too itchy, they're too twitchy. They got to move. Something has to be happening, and that's no good. You got to learn how to hear what people say. And we've got a mnemonic example coming up of a very wise proverb that you might want to have in your memory, and an example of how to memorize it. So stick around if you're with us now. If you're just joining us now, hit that thumbs up. Let me know in the chat where you are in the world, what you're doing, what you're thinking, and let me know something if you have questions. This is your opportunity to ask questions and be involved, engage, active, share your perspectives, your viewpoints. This is an open forum, and it is live at the moment. If you're watching the replay, though, also hit the thumbs up. Let me know in the discussion below what you're doing, what you're thinking, how you're doing, and if you have questions. Let's see here. So Rasmus says, unfortunately, sometimes people are kind of forced to isolate themselves. Yeah, that may be so, but then I would just challenge them to, see what they can come up with. And that could be very, very useful. Yeah, let me find you a Future of Humanity link for you there. Future of Humanity. Sorry, I should have had that link prepared. Good call, William. Faux show. Yeah, check it out. Carl's a great guy, a really smart guy. I was able to hang out with him for a couple of days back in Sydney in August, and it was amazing. Oh, the link is faux show. I'm not following, but great that we got the link in the chat here anyway. Thank you for being here, Steve. Really wonderful contributions. Really appreciate each and every one. Thumbs up to Steve if you haven't thumbs upped yet. All right, so those are some of the reasons why long form content is so important. And the other thing is it just also shows the algorithms and the robots that humans really are engaged with this, and that matters. It matters in ways that you can't even imagine. And we know that YouTube has made some changes. They were pushing 3-minute videos. They saw the negative outcomes that were coming from it, so then they were pushing 10-minute videos, 12-minute videos, and so forth, just simply because it does damage to humans to have everything compressed into shorter and shorter periods of time. But at the same time, it's not only that, but they just know that they get to show more ads with longer form content. So that's another thing to be cautious of is what can we do collectively to make ads, less of this thing of the internet being totally corporatized and like network television. Because what is going to end up happening is that only the people who have massive advertising budgets are going to be able to create content for us all. So we need to show our support of this work that we appreciate. And unfortunately, with the current catastrophe that's been going on, a lot of people are right to withdraw their support when it's on this external platform, which was never a wise business decision for those people in the first place. But it did seem good, and it almost seemed too good to be true. And we know what they say about things that seem too good to be true. So that's one of the reasons why I do things the way that I do, which is the free course at magneticmemorymethod.com/YT without the need of anybody else getting in the way. And that's great because there's a reason why the magnetic memory method teaching works the way that it does, and it doesn't need the involvement of corporate interests, because we just go from the truth of what's actually going to work, and have plenty of success that way. It's one of the reasons why with my new book I'm still humming and hawing about whether I want a traditional publisher or not, because I know they're going to change it, dumb it down for sales purposes. And at the end of the day, if that's what has to happen in order to get a book in an airport. Does the book really need to be in the airport? Or will this community support this new book of mine sufficiently enough that it is irrelevant whether it's in airports or not, and has the thumbs up from the establishment publishers? If you have thoughts about that, let me know what you think. And are you interested in this new book that I'm going to put out? I'd be curious to know. I know I've been dancing around it, not really saying that much about it, unless you were on the webinar where we walked through the outline together. It's almost getting done. Probably the first draft will be done by the end of the year, and very, very curious to know if people here on this live now are aware of it, if you are interested in it to this day, and if you have any questions that I should be answering in the book, that would be great to know as well. All right, so if you are joining us, let me know in the chat where you are from, and let's talk about what to read and memorize, because a lot of people say, yeah, I'd love to read more, but it's hard to find good stuff. And one thing that, we don't want to generalize, but James Clear has this great thing, is like, if a book is not 100 years old and still on the market, you might want to read books that are at least 100 years old and still on the market as a kind of evolutionary test of its validity. There's pros and cons to that, but I always really, really like that idea that, has the book stood the test of time as one marker of whether you might want to read it or not. And really, I think that you want to read books definitely in some sort of historical order to get a sense of the progression of ideas over time. But you also want cutting-edge books, and a lot of those books will help you understand the older books better. So definitely keep that rule in mind, but see the pros and the cons of it for sure. But in general, just as some rules of thumb, multiple cultural traditions and histories is very, very important. Do some ancient language study if you can. This will help you understand more of what's going on in those histories and those different cultures. And avoid preference mazes and blind spots. So we tend to get very, very comfortable. We get our little pet projects. We get our little things that create joy and so forth, but then we don't get challenged, right? So read outside of your preference. Actively seek to read things that challenge you because they're written differently. They're in a different topic area. They're just not your thing, right? So when you have preferences, challenge them. Go outside of that and challenge your blind spots. You'll become aware of your blind spots when you do this, and keep out of the preference maze. It's very, very important. So Reclaiming Life says you could always make an author's edition of it unless copyrights prohibit you from doing so. That's cool. Yeah, author's edition or a study guide. That would be something. Thanks for that suggestion. That's good. I hadn't thought of that. At least I hadn't thought of it in that way. Certainly there would be some sort of licensing, copyright considerations. At the end of the day, I've had some mentors around this that convinced me to do the thing and get out a big old book on a traditional press, but I'm still a little suspicious, and maybe against the greater good, but we'll see. But ultimately, what we want to do is we want to get some discernment going, and so we want to be able to, essentially through reading multiple sources, we want to be able to consider incoming information in a better way, in a more refined way, so that when we answer, we're able to answer. So I promised you all I was going to do a mnemonic example of a phrase, and it is this: to answer before listening, that is folly and shame. So this is for an upcoming blog post that we're doing on memorizing scripture, which I'm very interested in, the memorization of scripture, if you haven't followed that before. But I was thinking, how to memorize this to answer before listening. That is folly and shame. So I had a friend. He had a sister named Andy, and so Andy is, answering an email from Faulty Towers, faulty like folly, and is very ashamed of doing this. And there's a bee who's putting honey all over the email as it's sent through the internet. It's electronic honey, B4, right? The listening thing, I don't really need any sort of signal of this, although John Cleese, I think John Cleese was in Faulty Towers like this. Ooh, listening could be in there. And to answer before listening, that is folly and shame. Now, this is Proverbs 18:13. So how are we going to remember this? Well, if you have your major in order, then you can have, like a TV. I have a particular character that's usually dancing on the TV, and a Hoover vacuum for 13 because of Hoover Dam, right? D and M. Anyway, I'm not going to get into the major right now, but just an interesting thing. And I think this proverb is really, really powerful to keep in mind because there's great wisdom in it, right? It is folly and shame to answer before listening. And one of the ways that you become a better listener is a listener who can absorb information and place it in not just one context, but multiple contexts, because you can do mental rotation of those ideas, see where they snap together in the mental Lego that you have accumulated for yourself. Do it, obviously, with modesty. Nobody knows everything, but when you're able to not only connect with multiple points of intersection and collaboration, so to speak, between where ideas fit and don't fit, then you're able to actually have a much more interesting, engaging conversation, and you're able to get more out of the time that you spend in conversation that is richly rewarding for all people involved, above all yourself. So Rasmus says, do you speed read? I sometimes feel my reading speed is slow and I criticize myself for being a slow reader. I don't. I practice some things from speed reading, which we'll talk about, priming, but I ultimately don't buy it. I don't practice it because I don't find it useful or enjoy it at all. And I just enjoy language too much. I want to steep myself in the words. And I just, to be fair, I've never developed it as a skill to experience what it is that they talk about. But I also just can't wrap my head around why that would be useful or beneficial. And it just seems to me like a false, it's going to create false outcomes. When I would rather read in the ways that I read, which they're very close to speed reading, but they're speed reading plus due diligence. So ultimately, I often joke that it's called slow reading, but it ultimately connects to what is called in the Magnetic Memory Method Masterclass bibliomancy, which is kind of a goofy term, but if you ever take that training, you'll understand why that I use it. And its only fault is that it sometimes leads to cryptomnesia, which is not really a fault at all, so long as you catch yourself in what might be cryptomnesia. It doesn't happen very, very often. But when you're a modest person who practices discernment and care for yourself and others, then you wind up catching yourself often enough to be clear. Reclaiming Life says, ancient language equals archaic dead language, just an older version language that you currently speak or know. Good question. I mean, I don't think that I don't like this term dead language. I'm not sure which language that should be, but certainly some sort of language study of an originary language. So like the value of Sanskrit studies that I'm doing right now is immense. You see so many wonderful emergences of how things wound up being the way that they are, not just in English, but many, many other languages. So there's many, many benefits there. And there's just also connecting to, John McWhorter, he has some strong arguments that the way language is formulated does not actually influence the way cultures think and how cultures think. And I think that, I don't have any disagreement with this whatsoever, nor am I particularly in the position to disagree with such an established linguist. However, it certainly is the case as a language learner myself that picking up certain ways that things were phrased and understanding them make them feel closer to that culture. There's no two ways around that. And that does have an influence on how one thinks and behaves through the understanding of what that means in that culture. And so even if it's misguided, it's not you're not incorrect about your feeling of how that means something that is in that culture. So there's really a lot of Germanisms, for example, that I learned that really endear you to Germans, and also you endear yourself to the Germans that you're speaking with when you show not only that you can use those terms, but that you understand the context in which they are used, and you're not just like goofily throwing out stuff that you picked up along the way. So that's really, really important. So I'm not sure about Proto-Slavic or Althochdeutsch. I'm not really sure where you're going with that, but is there benefit in learning it? Absolutely. What those benefits are, I can't necessarily predict, but I can comfortably claim that you will discover so much that is of huge, tremendous value for you. And if you don't, just stop. But I think one of the things that is so clear to me, having dealt with biblical Hebrew for a significant amount of time, now with Sanskrit, looking at Chinese, some classical Chinese, and seeing also German's relationship to English, and so on and so on. One of the things that you really, really get a sense of is a deeper understanding of what language is. And some of the insights can't necessarily be enunciated that clearly, but it's an interaction with it at a deeper level that just unlocks parts of the brain, and it makes you more open and accepting to language itself and how different individuals use language, because you notice their language more. You notice language itself more, and there's more care around language in your life. I think that's basically what I'm trying to get at. And you see that this is a human being that is expressing essentially based on a limited set of possible tools for expression. And you have greater empathy, I think, at the end of the day, the more that you study language. But it could be the other way around. There are certainly people who become, like in Sanskrit, there are these Sanskritists who are just, absolutely unpleasant to be around because they just have this snooty attitude about it, and they don't have what I'm saying at all. Yeah, it could go either way. We don't want to generalize, right? So Reclaiming Life says, that sounded very much like something the Dalai Lama would say, and if you don't, just stop. All right, well, I don't at all mind being lumped in with the Dalai Lama, I guess. I don't know that much about the guy, never met him. But it sounds like interesting company, to be sure. All right, so how about some suggestions on what you might want to read? I think it's Hazard Adams who put this together. Critical Theory Since Plato. Highly recommend people go through this. And the Nicomachean Ethics by Aristotle. Definitely the Republic by Plato, but you get enough of a snippet here and there, but I should have had there. Now, there's a book that I highly recommend called The Classic by Frank Kermode, or Kermode, I think it's pronounced Kermode, but this is an amazing book, and you really, really want to read this, because it will help you understand why some books catch on and why that some books should catch on that don't. And there's no right or wrong to it. It's just a very interesting, compelling sort of argument that he makes about why certain things take on the status of a classic in our society. And I think you'll really, really find that a useful text to read. Claiming Life has met the Dalai Lama twice and seen him 4 times. Wow, very, very cool. Love to hear more about those circumstances. Yeah, he sounds like a cool dude. Interesting figure. So John McWhorter and Steven Pinker, any of their books on linguistics are really, really great. They're great for also just getting an understanding of the history of linguistics. The extent to which you read any of that history of linguistics is totally up to you, but I really, really like them. They have a recent talk that was released of them just jamming on linguistics topics. Really, really great. So check that out. That's on YouTube. Search their names. I highly recommend getting into Daniel N. Robinson for psychology and philosophy. The lecture series that he has, they're very long and they're wonderful. So check that out. So I mentioned Foucault earlier. What is an author? Really great essay. It's kind of difficult, and it'll ultimately, I think the thing is to help you understand that there are discourses that are opened. There are discussions that are opened. And in that sort of, we must go beyond good and evil way that Nietzsche said, we've got to get beyond our preferences and our opinions and try to figure out, instead of the right or wrong here, what is the discussion that is being opened up? And why did it open up? And whose outcomes does that discussion serve if certain people get to say, this is right and this is wrong, right? That is what this essay, I think, is worth reading for. And that's basically how I've interpreted it. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think that's the powerful conclusion to be had from it. Ryan's Internet Adventure. Good to see you, Ryan. Hello. Thanks for saying hello. How not to say stupid things. Spend most of your attention reading and listening to others. Yeah, but that comes back to, something that we had before, which is it can also be stupid to not speak up when you have something in your mind. Rasmus says, as for reading Sanskrit, did you memorize a lot of words with magnetic memory methods and then started reading, or you looked up words and memorized them? Both of those things. So you need to understand what individual words mean and then put those words in phrases. In this case, I have the best of both worlds. I'm not sure I have all my books with me here to demonstrate, but there's one particular book, Inquiry into Existence, I think it's called. Yeah, Inquiry into Existence. It's the Panchadasi. It's James Schwartz's commentary on the Panchadasi. And what it does is it has a catalog of words at the very end. And so memorizing some of those is great. And then you see how they come up in the phrases. And, it's tricky because a lot of these words have multiple meanings. Those meanings shift in context. But it's just so much fun to just dive in. And then, of course, reading the actual commentaries and getting a better sense helps you understand those different ways that they can mean and how they mean, and really just dive in and immerse into this world called Advaita Vedanta and understand so much more quickly from studying multiple commentators, multiple sources, multiple definitions from multiple sources, and putting it into memory. Actually memorizing the actual phrases helps you get a sense of what's really being said here. So that's really, really important. James is here. Hello, James. Thanks for saying hello. Good to see you. And how would you like some more suggestions on what to read? If you're joining us, this is your opportunity to ask questions, get involved with your own viewpoints and books you might want to recommend rather than just mine. That would be awesome. Ryan says, hey, Anthony, you'll be proud. I've quit Anki. Well, I mean, I'll only be proud if it gets you the outcome you're looking for, faster, quicker, in a way that's more meaningful. So let's save the pride for the outcome that you're looking for based on, my general cautionary notes that I put around this software. So please, by all means, I do thank you for sharing that. You weren't here earlier, so you might want to go watch the replay, but I shared a wonderful accomplishment from a guy named Ray and some of his memory palaces, memorizing, a pretty tough poem in 3 days. So, go back, watch that replay, and then come back and share with us what you did in 3 days instead of spending that time on Anki, and that will be really, really great. So you say you started a system of recall rehearsal using to-do list after hearing a podcast from Kevin Horsley. Kevin's great. Please support him by getting his book. Leave a review of his book. That'd be awesome. James says, do I read Isaac Asimov? I haven't read Asimov for a long time. To be awesome, or sorry, to be honest, I never really got into Asimov. I didn't quite like him the way that I liked other sci-fi authors. But I may revisit him in the future. I've generally just completely lost interest in fiction, despite my wishes to get lost in a story. Now my fictional experiences are pretty much limited to going to the movies about once a week, and that's about it. Aries Cosmos is here. Hello, Aries Cosmos. Good to see you. Thanks for saying hello. Hello, Harvinder. Great to see Harvinder here always. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Inquiry into Existence by James Schwartz. But interesting that you mentioned Bruno Latour, because Bruno Latour is an interesting guy also. Let me think what that book of his was that I loved so much. Aramaeus, or the Love of Technology, I think it's called. I don't think that's quite right, but that is a cool book about the non-magnetic couplings of trains that they were trying to build in France and how that whole project fell apart. Is it Aramaeus? It's something in the Love of Technology. Let me see. Anyway, Bruno Latour is a really fascinating guy. Aramis. Yeah, I'm probably just pronouncing it right. Yeah, Aramis, or the Love of Technology. Anyway, no, I mean the James Schwartz commentary. It's actually the Panchadasi, and it's his commentary on the Panchadasi. So Panchadasi is a highly technical treatise on Advaita Vedanta, depending on how you want to pronounce it. So Ryan says, absolutely, this is an experiment. I've been dependent on Anki, and honestly, it was great learning about the concepts of SRS, but it builds up and becomes a source of anxiety. Yeah, that's definitely a problem. Definitely a problem. H.G. Wells is nuts. Yeah, H.G. Wells. Yeah, well, I like H.G. Wells a lot. He's pretty cool. So does anyone read Yuval Harari? He's become very famous recently and is a big H.G. Wells fan. I haven't read any of his books except for in passing, speed reading not really speed reading, but read in passing in the bookstores. But I've heard some of his talks with Sam Harris, and really interesting guy. And he sounds a lot like my friend Idan Kertis, similar accent, because they're from a similar place. Right. So yeah, H.G. Wells is cool. Yeah, Sapiens Homo Deus, and his most recent book is the one that I've spent the most time flipping through, but did not dive in and get it. Rasmus says, I quit Anki too. Those reviews became overwhelming. I remember once 10,000 reviews were waiting. Yeah, this is such a strange thing that happens with people with any SRS. It doesn't have to do with the SRS that you're using. It has to do with the hunter-gatherer syndrome that SRS puts into place. People you cannot use space repetition in this way. That's why small memory palaces used properly with effective recall rehearsal will always trump this. It just logically must, because you can't deal with 10,000 or even 1,000 things that you have to go through on these cards. It doesn't make any sense. And the very fact that you need that many, that you've gathered that many, just is a testament to not really understanding the high order words in a language that you would need on a day-to-day basis, and just getting those in. So hunter-gatherer syndrome is something that the internet has triggered in a big way, and be aware of it and just reduce it. Focus on the words that matter, not just grab, and somebody else's list and so on. There are intelligently constructed lists out there that people won't pay their dues with, and it would just be a lot better if they would, as quickly as possible. All right. Footballhead asks, what are my political leanings? They do not lean, and they don't yo-yo, and none of those things. I will answer the question this way. I started in political science when I was in university. It wasn't until really second, third, it's hard to count because of the way that I went to university, because I often, in the early years, had to have 3 jobs at the same time, so I wasn't ever full-time enrolled, but I was in political science. I was working in the school newspaper, and I interviewed the Premier of British Columbia at the time, and after that I immediately stopped being in political science and went into English literature instead. In retrospect, I probably would have done better in philosophy, but I love that I did English literature and found my way to philosophy through that. And really, that's my statement on politics. If you have any further questions around that, by all means, but I don't lean. And that's one thing that people who do have political leanings need to think seriously about. And often their leanings are yo-yos more than anything. Many people are they're relativists, and they do it in ways that are egregious, uninteresting, and require more discernment, and they require more dedication to just getting to the truth of things and understanding that we're all in a historical moment, and the impact that we can make, the real impact that's going to last, is likely to be found in other places. All right. So Physico is here. Hello, Physico. Thanks for saying hello. If you're joining us now, hit the thumbs up. Let me know where you are in the world, what you're doing, how you're feeling, what you're thinking. And really appreciate all of these wonderful comments and interaction. Footballhead says, cool. Cool, right back at you, man. And by all means, if you have things to share of your own things, but that'd be great. Aries Como says, all right. Yes, all right, indeed. Let's see, where are we here? Ryan's Internet Adventure says, I'm glad you said that. I've been using small memory palaces for language learning over the alphabetical memory palace technique because they seem enormous. I would do both, my friend. Anthony says, or Ryan says, Anthony wants to make Canada great again and put up a big wall. No, I don't. That's the strangest thing I've ever said. So I have to take more caution in reading out loud what these comments are that you're putting there. I do not want any walls between Canada and the United States. I don't live in Canada. I haven't lived in Canada for years. And that is, let's just leave it at that. But it may be a comment in and of itself. Let's see. Oh, I see. If I read the rest, I might see it as a big joke. So to use a post in a memory palace. Well, that's interesting that you mentioned that, actually, Ryan, because borders could potentially make for interesting memory palaces. That's a compelling idea. So at least a brain exercise that you can do right now, if you are in a part of life where you've crossed borders, is just to go through your life and think, how many borders have you crossed through? Do you remember the names of the borders? And do you remember where they were? What details do you remember? So one of the things that comes to my mind is I lived in Germany and first visited Germany shortly after the borders had come down. And I remember these ghost town borders. Particularly one that comes to mind was where I first crossed into France from Germany and vice versa. And it was kind of spooky and weird. I remember going into Czech Republic, and it's just so strange that all of a sudden there was a border there at that time. And it's just really interesting. And then sometimes when you go into Switzerland, there'll be a border. Sometimes there won't. Really interesting, really interesting. So those could all become either memory palaces or just brain exercise. Then I've had many, many interesting experiences going from Canada to the US and back home. And that'd be great brain exercise. And obviously, there's many places that I've visited around the world that have very, very interesting experiences upon port of entry and point of entry. So very interesting. Great. So let's see. James says, can you recommend any authors that made books in the 1950s or early 1950s that aren't as famous? So why does it have to be 1950s? That's the first thing that I would ask. So that would be something. And let me think for you. Are you looking for fiction or nonfiction? Physico says, asks if you lost too much of the stream. I don't know how long we've been going, just having fun here. Probably we've been going for a while. Ryan's Internet Adventure says, if there's reading with a lot of new words, I come back to the same text in a spaced repetition manner. All right. Kevin Horsley said he does that. I'm not sure what that refers to, but great. Borders, maybe? Yeah, okay. He also uses Google Maps. Yeah, I mean, use Google Maps. Am I familiar with the YouTuber Black Pigeon Speaks, another Canadian expat? No, I haven't, but thanks for mentioning him. Should we collaborate somehow? I'll look it up. Thank you for suggesting that. I don't do enough YouTube. I don't even think I've ever done it, except for with Jonathan. I don't think I've done any YouTube collaborations. But if it's political stuff, not really interested. I'm not interested in political things really at all, at least not in a public sense, but I just don't have political thoughts. My biggest political thing is just to protect the unfragmented internet and what makes the internet so beautiful and great. And that should not be a political question. That should be basically a question of human rights and preserving something that is very good, what is very good. So there's so many books, James, that we could mention, and I'm mentioning a bunch, but if it has to be 1900 to 1950, The Gay Science by Nietzsche is before that, because Nietzsche, I believe, died in 1900, so I'm not sure which year this one came out. And pretty much every single one of these books is definitely post-1950. But 50s authors, I'm not sure how active J.G. Ballard was in the 50s, but he might be interesting to you. Burroughs' Naked Lunch, I'm pretty sure was a 50s book. Check out those guys. The whole beat stuff might be interesting to you, and so on. All right. So, why people believe weird things. This is Michael Shermer. I'm so glad that I had a university course. I took a course in anthropology. It was a third-year course, if memory serves, and it was one of the first times I got an A+, and I loved that course. And one of the textbooks was Michael Shermer's Why People Believe Weird Things. And he is great. I don't have a copy of it, but I also have his book Skeptic here, and Shermer is just amazing. So check out Michael Shermer. Really, really great. Skeptic. And so I learned a lot from there. I highly recommend that book for helping you not say stupid things and be on the side of saying smart things. And, you know, you can do so in ways that are not political or need to be politicized. The Luck Factor by Richard Weissman. Highly recommend this book if you haven't read it. It's a science-based way of thinking about luck, and read that. Now, Love and Death and Psychotherapy. I told you I would talk about some different ideas that are maybe a little bit on the strange side, but I think it'll bear out in your experience. Anyway, I know this guy, Robert Langs, because I did psychoanalysis with him. I did psychotherapy with him. And that was a wild experience, which I'm writing about in my new book and unpacking the lessons that I learned there and how that I've applied them again and again throughout life. Happiness Beyond Thought by Gary Weber. You've heard me talk about it again and again and again, perhaps ad nauseum, but well worth repeating, because this book is a powerhouse. But I don't, know the extent to which it will be for you, because it depends a lot on your existing competence. So highly like that book and have benefited from it a great deal. Again, The Gay Science by Nietzsche. This is one of the books where I really got switched on to science of the self and the best tools of science for formulating what you would do essentially if you were cursed to live the same day again and again and again, and wanted that day to be blissful, peaceful, rewarding, and any pain and suffering that showed up in it that you would accept like a champion and just get on with it. All right. So Reclaiming Life says, haven't seen him talk about memory stuff, but he's really intelligent. Yeah, well, I mean, interesting. Thank you for the suggestion. I will check it out. James is a kid in high school. Wow, I wish I was a kid in high school again. So, okay, so here's the brain exercise for me. The books that I read that were most impacting in high school were The Stranger by Albert Camus. check that out. You might see it called The Outsider in English translation. So one of the things to find out, and it's really interesting, is that some people translate the first sentence as "mother died today," but a lot of, like, it's, I believe in French it's "maman," and so he's really saying "mummy died today," as far as I understand. So "mama died today." Look for a translation maybe where you find that. Anyway, whatever. The Outsider, The Stranger, read that book. I recommend it anyway, highly. Demian by Hermann Hesse. Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse. Journey to the East by Hermann Hesse. These were all books that I just absolutely loved in high school. It was like much later that I got into Steppenwolf. I don't know if I would have liked it that much as a younger person. Aries says, I read that in college. By the way, guys, when you use these chats, words like that and it and so forth, they make it very, very difficult to know what you're referring to. So see if you can't use things. When I was a professor, I always used to say, even if it's repetitive, use the name again and again and again, because clarity gets lost so much. So, when I was teaching Shakespeare and stuff like this, people would be he, she. It's like, who? Hamlet is Hamlet. Use the word Hamlet. And if you're using the title of a book, use the title of the book again and again and again. So when Aries Cosmos says, I read that in college, great, but no idea what that is. Football head. So what state do you live in? I do not live in a state. Aries lives in CA, though. Great. Another book that I would recommend is A New Philosophy of Society by Manuel de Landa. I was so lucky to have him also as a professor. Learned so much from him. And wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. A couple more suggestions for you. And this is all for stimulating critical thinking and coming up with, discernment. Does a literary work have one and only one correct interpretation? This is P.D. Jules. It's a chapter in a book called Interpretation. Read the whole book by all means. But this is really, really important. It's a great mathematical demonstration of why interpretation is a trap in so many cases. So that would be really important. Oh, by the way, not all these things were read in high school. I was just coming up with a list of certain things. I skipped off what I read in high school stuff. 1984, Animal Farm. Those were great high school reads that impacted me a lot, obviously. And then, I started to get very interested in the biographies of authors in high school too. So I would not just read about, I wouldn't just read Camus and Hesse and Orwell, but I'd read about them, often just in the encyclopedia. But later in college, I started to read the biographies, the full biographies of these people, which is really, really important to do. And that will help you not make such crass judgments about what mistakes people may or may not have done in their careers. For example, Brecht. So Brecht, when you understand Verfremdung's effect, that's great. That's one thing. But then when you understand like how he ran his business and how so much of his stuff he didn't actually write, really, really interesting character. So reading Brecht and reading about Brecht, they got to go together. Just Being Difficult. This is a really, really important book for understanding why academic writing is sometimes so obscure, and I highly recommend that. Jonathan Culler, I think, is the guy. Yep. And its subtitle is Academic Writing in the Public Arena. So definitely check that out. I think you'll find it rewarding if you've ever wondered why some scholarly writing is so painful. And, of course, Waking Up by Sam Harris. I think this is great. All his books are important and pivotal. But this one is great. Reclaiming Life says, any philosophy book, Sophie's World is a great overview, and then read deeper from that book onto others you feel strongly about. Yeah, great. You've mentioned Sophie's World before. I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but it's a great suggestion, and I definitely want to. James says, Robert Louis Stevenson is a good author. Yeah, he's an interesting cat. Definitely read him. Jack London is interesting too. But I think the thing to do, right, is to read those guys, but also read about the era that produced that kind of writing, because these guys were like sometimes getting paid like a fraction of a penny per word, and they were grinders, a lot of them, and that is interesting and important to understand. So really great discussion. Thanks for sharing all these things. I'll try and think of more books that impacted me when I was a kid or younger. And, sometimes when you think back, you can play intellectual games with books and think about what they meant and interpret them differently. I had an uncle who died, sadly, in a tragic accident that he created himself by drinking while driving. But it wasn't really my uncle, actually, either. But he was uncle in the sense that he was such a good friend of my dad that we called him uncle. Anyway, he told me, he said, you should read novels at least once every 7 years, because your chemical structure, all your cells are replaced and you're essentially a different person, which means it's essentially a different book. So I've done that a lot, even though I find it harder now to read novels and sort of keep up with that. But I do try to read at least one book, reread one book once a month. And one of the novels that I have really thought about reading and have read every 7 years is The Running Man by Stephen King or Richard Bachman. And that book it just says so much about life and the world, and it accumulates value or accretes value over time. And that book just has a lot to say that we could use right now to talk about our current culture, our current internet culture, even though it's like got VHS or Betamax cassettes is part of the story. So if you don't know Running Man, I think you really, really should not only read it, but think about the title Running Man and what's going on these days. And, why not watch the Schwarzenegger movie too, even though it's bizarre and strange and different. It's because it's a different viewpoint that can create a little bit of cognitive dissonance in your head, but it's still just like an interesting movie. And it's an artifact of its era. And then you go and you study, like, how was it possible that all those movies were made during that era, and learn more about, the production history of them. And it's very, very rewarding. And likewise with Jack London and Stevenson and so forth. All right. So, how can you remember what you read so that you actually can be smart and use these tools of tools of discernment? Sometimes they will be tools of dissonance. Reclaiming Life says it's not Richard Bachman, but Richard Bach's Jonathan Livingston Seagull, and sequels are amazing. Seagull? I haven't read any of that, actually. I'll check it out. Richard Brautigan, he comes to mind. He was another guy I liked when I was a kid. Revenge of the Lawn. I remember that book being really impactful to me when I was in high school. Yeah, he was quite a character. Definitely read Richard Brautigan. I recommend that. Weird, strange stuff. Aries Cosmos says, I love the movie Running Man. Yeah, I gotta go watch it again. I'm not sure if I can get through it, but that guy who plays the talk show host or the game show host, he was a great actor. Amazing. I think he was really a game show host in real life. So perfect choice. I read a book one time that had a compelling argument that it said, and I don't know if it would still bear scrutiny, but at the time it was a compelling argument that I think is still interesting. The argument is that if you look at the movies of superhero or action heroes during the era, and you look at who's president at the time, you may see a coordination. So their argument was that during the Reagan era, Reagan's got a big body, sort of like this hulking figure. And then who are the action stars? Schwarzenegger, Stallone, Dolph Lundgren, like all these big meaty people. And he said, but if you look when Bush is the president, then you get like this Jack Ryan kind of stuff, which is more slim and sleek and so forth. And if you look further back, and so on, like, it's not a one-to-one parallel. I don't think they were trying to say there's an exact match here, but it was just kind of compelling to think about this. And it doesn't mean that there's a propagandistic system there or anything like this, but it's just, is there a is there a kind of influence on the choice of actor based on who is the president and the kind of behaviors of those actors and so forth? Yeah, reread Dr. Seuss now that you are older. Exactly. Great, great, great. Yeah, that's a good suggestion. I like that one. Thumbs up to that. If you haven't hit the thumbs up yet, please do so now. Get subscribed to this channel if you're not already subscribed. And go to magneticmarymethod.com/YT if you don't have our free course, because you will benefit from it a great deal. And it will help you create a memory palace network that allows you to learn a language faster, memorize what you read from books, get a PAO working for yourself. There's the link in the chat for you. And Physico says, I think it's the shooter's fallacy about the superhero movie thing. I'm not sure what the shooter's fallacy is, but I'm going to look into that. That sounds very compelling. Oh, my link didn't go through. I wonder why not. It's not letting me put in my own link. Weird. Try again in a bit. Anyway, it's further up in the chat. It's in the description. And go to magneticmarymethod.com/YT. Physical says doesn't think it's really connected. Yeah, I'm not saying it is, but I think it's interesting to think about. So Eric, thank you for being here. And from Jersey, great, great, great. Good to have some, I've spent a bit of time in Jersey. I taught at Rutgers, of course, and spent time in the area and other parts of Jersey. Really like that state a lot. And I love driving into Manhattan from New Jersey. It's quite something. It is like seeing the Emerald City, to be sure. And if you haven't had that chance to do so in your life, highly recommend that you do. Footballhead says, what about William Howard Taft? Don't really know the guy, but thanks for putting in a suggestion. Put it on the to-do list. Does ring a bell. Oh, good question from Reclaiming Life. Jersey in the USA or Jersey in the UK? So Eric says, great to hear. Graduated from Rutgers myself. It's always nice to be near the city. Great opportunity for forming memory palaces for sure. Great, great, great. Yeah, so what did you do at Rutgers? That'd be interesting. Kurt Spellmeyer was my director. Sorry, I pronounced it with the German, Spellmeyer. Really great guy. He's written some powerful, impacting stuff. Really great honor to learn from him, and I learned so much about teaching from him, so that was fun. James says, what's the difference between novelist and writer? That's interesting. Well, I mean, novels are fiction. Many novelists write both fiction and nonfiction. So sometimes, you'll have a preference for one or the other from a particular author, or you'll like both. I tend to now read more nonfiction than fiction. But one guy, I can't get into his fiction. I've never read any of his fiction completely, but I like his nonfiction a lot, is Jonathan Franzen. He writes amazing little essays and so forth. So highly check that out. One is about, the death of his father and his father dealing with, memory problems later in life. Really compelling and fascinating. But the difference between a novelist and a writer there not necessarily is one. Burroughs always used to say, don't call him a writer, he's a person who writes. So that I found interesting. I've never forgotten that. There's a guy named Ramith Sethi who did these experiments where he would tell some people he was a writer and some people he was an author. And he found that he got more respect from people when he said he was an author. And in my experience in Germany, Autor is a little bit more impactful than Schriftsteller, that's for sure. But my visa was actually listed as a Schriftsteller, which means writer. I'm sure that there's ultimately, at the end of the day, the difference comes down to, how you use things rhetorically and how you present yourself one way or the other. But that is an interesting and compelling question and a very good one to ask and consider. All right, so when you want to remember what you read, obviously Memory Palace Network is the ultimate thing to have. And so if you want to know about that, make sure you take the free course at magneticmarymethod.com/YT, or, go into the masterclass if you already have it. Take the master plan course and other courses. Going to be doing some additional updates to the master plan in 2019, so stay tuned for that as well. There's already been some updates in the last year, so if you're missing out on those, go and avail yourself of them, and you'll enjoy and learn a lot as a result, and really look forward to seeing what you do with these wonderful techniques. They'll be very helpful to you. But once that you have them, then you can start to develop a 00 to 99 PAO, person action object, where we really work on putting it just as a magnetic PAO, which means that the person is as often as possible the action and the object. And this will help you with dates. You can memorize the book's date as well. So if it mentions dates, that's one thing, but then the date of the book itself is also useful. And remember page numbers where it's useful. So, I still use bookmarks from time to time, but it's pretty cool when I'm memorizing, for example, the Upadesa Saram. I can think, it starts on page 75, and then I can actually do a little mental calculation. So I've memorized 3 parts. So the introduction is on page 75, and then I've memorized pages 76, 77, and 78. And here we go, page 75. There it is, and yep. Those 3 pages are memorized. Great. So it's just kind of like a useful skill to skip in books. And yes, I do still use bookmarks, but I also like to memorize the pages where it's useful. And so, one of the things that came up today was also anxiety around things. And when you have the confidence of remembering not just what it is that a book said, but also where in the book that it is, this is just another level of confidence that you create for yourself, and also just joy of the practice, and the dates and whatnot. And for as long as they're useful, you don't have to memorize certain things forever. Maybe you just have it for an exam or for a period of time. And even being able to ballpark things later is useful. And it's a tool of comparison as well, because when you can think about when Bruno died, for example, and you think about Nietzsche when Nietzsche died, well, you can make a picture of how many years was between those 2 deaths. And that's a great mental tool of comparison, to think about time as a substance, so to speak, that has actual value, worth, so to speak, that has a place in your mind mentally, that allows you to slot in things in between, compare, contrast, think about different parts of the world and where these authors were and what the relationships might be. And then you think, well, Nietzsche went to Italy. I wonder if he ever read Bruno, and think about the dates and where was he in Italy, and did he ever get as far as Rome and so forth. And as far as I know, he only ever got as far as Rapallo. But in any case, all very useful things to consider, because it's not just duration of time, but distance of geography that you can memorize as well when you have these number skills. And ultimately, at the end of the day, you want to relax into knowledge. You want to relax and let go of the outcome. So we talked about that before, but how do you do that? How do you actually help yourself let go of the outcome? Well, one of the biggest tools is to meditate, so that you can relax, be calm, be cool, just let things go. Let things go. That's something that I think meditation is the ultimate way to be able to do that, because you start to see that your mind is this entity that is not you. It's something that exists in what you really are. And it is operating according to certain rules that are structural in nature, that are time-based in nature, time of day based in nature, and that you can understand how it operates and not be so involved in it, not be so subject to its tyranny, even if its tyranny continues. So this is really, really important, to have this distance. So meditation is a big thing. Now, the thing to understand about meditation is there's multiple kinds of meditation. They may work for you differently at different periods of your life, so you want to explore. Remove irritants from your diet and your lifestyle. A lot of people don't do enough work on this, because they're beating themselves up wondering why that they're saying stupid things. Well, they could be completely irritated in their physical bodies, in their brain. Their brain may be completely how do you say this? Inflamed, right? Because you don't feel pain in your brain apparently, and this inflaming can cause you to behave in strange ways and say things that you'd rather not say. So quick goodbye to William, Reclaiming Life. Thanks for being here. All your great contributions. Really appreciate it. Thumbs up for William if you haven't put a thumbs up yet. And much appreciation from me, and I'm sure others as well, even if they're not going to type in their gratitude. I'm very grateful. And happy meditating, happy sleeping, and thank you for being here. Much appreciated. And speaking of sleep, improve your sleep. You know, the sleep is something that you can improve, and your physical fitness is something that you can improve, and you can do so for the long haul. Play the long game in all of these improvements. Meditation is a long game. Diet optimization is a long game. Anything that you want, anything worth doing is going to be done over time, right? So commit to it. How do you commit? Well, journal. There's multiple kinds of journaling that you can do, but writing down on paper a goal, putting it into action in your life is really, really important. And you can do other kinds of journaling. You can journal your gratitude. We know scientifically that this helps create positive mental and quite likely brain chemical changes. Dream journaling, general memory journaling, all very, very powerful. Eric says, will you be talking about meditation in your new book? Yes, thank you for asking. It's going to talk about numerous kinds of meditation, and it's going to talk about putting multiple kinds of meditation into a habit chain that creates chemical levels in your brain of myelin, dopamine, other opioids that are very positive, norepinephrine, etc., like that. And then you'll build a way of actually tracking that this is happening to you and put it into action. So thank you for asking about that. I'm getting near to completion with the first draft. Gonna have some lunch, go keep on working on it. I'm enjoying writing it so much. It is its own discipline though, right? Like, it only gets written if you show up and write it. And I've just almost finished it, like a pretty big chapter yesterday. And by finish I mean drafted. And so I don't know exactly how it's going to be released yet, or what the developmental process will be like, but I definitely want to get the help of a accomplished editor to, make sure that it's great, as great as it possibly can be. And so thank you again for asking about it. You say, Eric, too, that you are just starting to read Bruno's book yourself by Scott. Excellent, excellent, excellent. After you read Scott's, there's another translation you might want to check out by John Michael Greer. We were talking about it earlier today. He translates it on the shadows of the ideas. So that was good. James asks, what is an essayist? So that's a good question. Why is an essay different than a nonfiction book or a story? Well, is it? It depends. An essay, though, typically is a objective or subjective account of a situation that makes an argument that persuades you to think differently about something or to learn something that you never knew about before. It will typically have a viewpoint, and that viewpoint will be expressed through the accumulation of details of an anecdotal or researched manner. And there's many, many different kinds of essays. There's biographical essays, there's journalistic essays, there's scientific essays. And then when we talk about an essayist, that is someone who is often practicing the art of nonfiction in shorter form, is the way we often use that term. So I hope that answers your question, and a great one. Thank you. You've got many, many great questions. Really appreciate them. So any questions any people have, let's have them come in, and any comments. And it is great to have had everybody here today. Always a pleasure to serve. And wow, we had many, many books mentioned today. Many great, interesting viewpoints come up. And thanks again to MPC Tube for the super chat, and to everybody who has been part of this community and continues to be part of the community. And if you don't have the free course, go to magneticmemorymethod.com/YT to make sure that you do. And as always, really appreciate all the existing masterclass people who are here. And yeah, it's not letting me put that in the chat for some reason. But do a little bit of mailbag here very briefly. If you want to take this time to put in any last comments or question, and then we'll call it a day. But let's see here. Aries is going to do the free course. Excellent. Basically, you go in, you get the videos, you get the worksheets, and when you put them into action, what you'll do is have a great mental adventure that unlocks the powers of your mind and enables you to develop a memory palace network that will be robust enough to actually help you memorize lots of information en masse. And Aries says, I'm excited for I'm starting college with this new technique. Excellent. Wow, I wish that I had this when I was starting college, because I didn't until later in the game, and you know, it was almost too late. So you can really hit the ground running. So let's see if we have some questions here that we can share and help you with as you put in any last comments or questions that you have if you're joining us on the live now. And if you are watching this later and you check out the replay, you can indeed put your comments down below in the discussion area. So let's see here. So there's a question about using outdoor memory palaces, and basically my biggest stance on outdoor memory palaces is use them with caution. If they work for you, if they help you legitimately, then you know, nothing speaks against it. I'm doing an outdoor memory palace experiment right now. It just never really quite works for me as well as indoor memory palaces, but it is very, very important to give them a try and see the difference for yourself. And so I like to do it once in a while to feel the challenge, to feel the difference, to test my own assumptions about it. You know, one of the big themes today was test your own assumptions. Test them repeatedly. Be truly in it for the long term, and the game never ends, and you want to test and retest, and things that didn't work on Monday might work really well on Thursday. So, you know, don't be too sure that something is not going to work for you, and then you might have a different opinion about it, and then you essentially become a better person who can explain this better because you haven't written something off eternally, right? Which is what a lot of people do. And so even though I still can't really crack the code, so to speak, on outdoor memory palaces quite the same way as indoor memory palaces, I know why. And so I'm thinking of ways to improve the practice right now. And if I really feel like, yeah, that is something, then I'll make a little course around it and explain what I did differently and what ultimately made it work. And the cool thing about outdoor memory palaces is that we can go on a little walk in the course and show you sort of what's going on in the mind. Physical says, I just will drop a like and thank you. Your words are very powerful, not in tone, but in effectiveness. I'm thankful for hearing your chill voice and interacting with this community. Excellent, Physico. Appreciate your kind words. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for the thumbs up. And if you are here and haven't told the robots that you appreciate humans, speaking with humans, please do. That thumbs up is more important these days than you would imagine for letting automated algorithms know what humans like. All right. Eric says, you found out about this technique near the end of college and your GPA skyrocketed by a significant amount. You're lucky to start with it. Thanks for sharing that, Eric. Yeah, it'll take you to the next level for sure. You're going to have a lot of fun with it. So that's some great feedback, everybody. Thank you for that. And yeah, I mean, again, I just wish that I had this when I was starting. I would have hit the ground running a lot easier, that's for sure. But yeah, that's the ultimate take on outdoor memory palaces. Give them a try. See the difference for yourself. All right, let's see here. Another question. Do you need to make a memory palace to the perfect size of the amount of information that you want to remember? Is it a waste to put only a little information into a memory palace because you cannot use the palace for much else? So here's the thing. It's never a waste. It's never a waste. How could it ever be a waste, right? You're just exercising your memory, not just exercising and using your memory, but you're using your autobiographical memory, your figural memory, your episodic memory, your procedural memory, your semantic memory. All this stuff is being exercised. So there's no waste, and it can't happen. Now, in terms of perfectly sizing, no, I always suggest oversizing if you can. And the reason why is because when you're memorizing something, certain things will take more space than anticipated. So what I memorized yesterday from Ripu Gita. I also memorized something from Upadesa Saram, but that was a different thing that didn't have this issue. But there was something where I was just like, I can't squeeze all that in. I'm going to need an extra station. And because there are multiple stations already there, more than are needed, no problem. So you want to generally anticipate that more room is better, but also you don't want to make these massive memory palaces that are impossible to navigate. And that's just not what is going to be useful at the end of the day. So it's just a question of, more than you need, but not too much more. And never, ever trick yourself into thinking that it's a waste. This is what I call memory palace scarcity. It is dangerous, dangerous thinking. And we do need that term in our minds whenever we think, oh, I don't have enough space, or oh, this is a waste. It's never a waste when you're actually diving in, learning through using. So that's another question. And with that, since there are no further chats, thank you everybody for a wonderful time today. Really appreciate each and every moment that we're able to hang out together to talk about memory. And I am looking for your suggestions for 2019, the kinds of topics you'd like to see, and what we can do as a community to, help more people find the memory tradition, dive in, actually take action, because the questions are great, but the answers are in the action almost all the time. So we don't want to have data for later and all that sort of stuff. We want to really, really put it into action and not create mnemonic example addiction, which I know is a very real problem, and it leads people to just consume more information about memory when they need to be taking action. So maybe I'm a little, hardcore on that, but I find it to be true. In Happiness Beyond Thought, Gary Weber talks about how the best teachers teach by abandonment, and I don't think that I teach by abandonment, but certainly the truth of teaching is that you do need to be abandoned. We see this all around nature. The bird cannot fly unless the bird flies, right? And the fisherman or the fisherwoman cannot fish unless they have the reel in their hands. And the longer that they are sitting there watching someone else fish, the longer they are putting between themselves and having the skill of fishing. It's really, really, really clear, simple, easy to understand that, and it's very, very important that you dive in and get results, get action, get knowledge through action, because action creates knowledge that dispels ignorance forever. Because once you've felt it for yourself, once you've memorized something and you get it back, you're like, now I get this. Now I understand what they're talking about, and then you just refine your practice. So that's great. Eric, biology and philosophy together. What a great combination. That is exciting to hear. Excellent. So Physical says, how to get rid of time wasted in showering, do some useful things, systematize it. Yeah, like when I shower, I just recite what I've memorized, right? I'm sitting there showering, and one of the things I was doing in my research recently, I realized as I read this that, because I thought about this, I had speculated it, about it, and it is, like, for example, singing creates cortisol. So, and other chemicals that are involved in healing your body. So, like, you don't have to sing in the shower necessarily, but reciting and then just if you want to try singing, it could be something that helps you get it into memory, but also creates a better feeling because of the chemicals that are produced by singing. Maricella's here. Great to see you, Maricella. You know what, Aries, I'm sorry, but we're having a hard time posting this link here. It keeps saying error, try again. I don't know why that would be. Let me try again. But it's magneticmemorymethod.com/YT. On almost all these slides, you see this /YT. Just put magneticmemorymethod.com/YT. I'm going to try and put this link in again. I do not know why that it's saying error, try again, but it's very odd. It won't let me put it in there. Strange. But in any case, there we go. So, yeah, basically to get to your question, how to systematize it, Physico, I would suggest that you try to create multiple systems and practice the creation of systems and have different systems that you can play out over time. The one system is pretty unlikely. You need to rotate. The mind gets tired. It gets bored. It needs novelty. Novelty is part of memory. The production of norepinephrine and so forth is really, really important to memory formation. We know this. And we get tired. We get topic exhaustion and so forth. That's why when I'm memorizing this long project with the Rupa Gita, and then I sometimes spend, just skip a day and I still memorize, but I go to Upadesa Saram or Atmabodha to get a bit of that novelty effect. Really, really important. And yes, Aries, it's in the description. That's right. Maricella says, I do not want to say silly or stupid things in 2019 and the next years. Well, then please check out the replay of this presentation because we have basically finished. I'm sorry that we missed each other, but there's always the replay, and that's what it's there for. I think you'll find it useful. And that's there for you, and I think you'll find it helpful. But I don't predict that you were going to say anything silly or stupid in 2019. And one of the core messages today, in case it wasn't clear, is chances are that you're not saying stupid things in the first place. And even if you did, they're probably not being picked up again. So Physica wants a meta system, a system to use, create, and analyze a system. A video about this would be appreciated. Well, okay, but what would be better is for you to create the meta system that you want and then teach us what you did than me inventing some stuff about a meta system that is used to create and analyze a system. A video that I would make would not be appreciated because it would just be complete nonsense. I don't really have any thoughts or ideas about this. I don't understand the outcome, but I'd really like to see you create a meta system, whatever that means, and then use it to analyze. If the closest thing that I can think of to what you're talking about would be something like, for example, in the Freedom Journal, if you finish a sprint, then you have pause for perspective, and then you analyze what you did during the previous sprint. So that's kind of maybe something like what you're talking about. But we already have material on the Freedom Journal on magneticmemorymethod.com/freedom-journal. So you can look at that. But I don't really talk about that sort of aspect of it because I think that kind of like 10-day rundown is, to me, the least of the activities that I have focused on personally. So it's not that I find it useful or not useful. It's just that I don't really use it because I'm in the 100-day sort of category with what I'm doing, and much more interested in the long-term goal. So I appreciate that you would appreciate that, Physical, but it's probably not the thing that I'm going to create because I don't... The meta system that I suggest is already suggested, but it's not really, I wouldn't even think of it as a meta suggestion, or a meta system, sorry. I'm meta'd out. So, James says, do you know any old books on how to get love? Like the old ways before technology. Well, what do you mean, how to get love? I'm not sure what that means, how to get love. I mean, there's lots of ways to interpret that, my friend. Let me know what you mean. The old ways before technology. I'm not sure much has changed in technology. Physical says, I am meta confused. I don't know. But like a girlfriend. Oh, well, how to get a girlfriend. Do we really want to get into this? Let me think here. So, what is a girlfriend? Like, let's start with that. Like, what does it mean to you to have a girlfriend? What's the desire? One of the things that is really in the discussion a lot these days is why that, but how we're going to deal with the technological changes relative to mating behaviors and the desire to couple and so forth. So there certainly are changes, especially in the brain chemistry and so forth. But one of the things is that people long to connect with others. There's no doubt about it. And that can create, the Germans have the term Sehnsucht. And it's almost like seeking after being in the way that I kind of prefer to think of that word. I don't know if that's exactly how it should be translated, but we long for connection. We long for meaningful connection with another human being. But one of the problems is that you need to be complete in and of yourself so that you can experience the completeness of another person who is also complete. So if you're trying to find people who complement each other or complete each other, I think this is a losing gambit. It's certainly in my experience, it never works. So what you need to be is completely, I think, anyway, and I don't want to be what you need to be or what you should be or anything like that, is work on yourself, work on feeling complete in and of yourself, and be someone who can ultimately give without expectation of return to the person most suited and capable of doing the same and just enjoying with you whatever happens without needing it to go in any particular way, and without threat of punishment if it doesn't work out. So that's easier said than done. And the number one challenge that all of us have, regardless of what our orientation is or regardless of anything that may be going on in our lives, is we have a brain that is filled with chemicals. And we need to have the discernment to separate our base impulses and wants and longing and needs from what we really, really want and need. And this is the hero's journey, right? The hero's journey is that you have a driving ambition and you have unconscious needs, and they're in conflict with one another. And we often don't realize this. And as this conflict between our driving ambition and our unconscious need becomes clearer and clearer to us, what we realize is that what we wanted, what we felt so driven for, what we were so ambitious for, whether it's a girlfriend or a boyfriend or a whatever friend, partner, friend with benefits, etc., that wasn't really what we needed. And so self-revelation, the self-revelation that leads to self-actualization of the hero, is realizing that you never really wanted that driving ambition in the first place. And this happens through life again and again and again until that you finally realize the difference between the illusions that the chemical brain creates, that creates a driving ambition towards something you never actually wanted in the first place. You were driven to it, but you never really wanted it, and it obscured what you need, right? And what we need is often not as sexy or as attractive or as interesting as what we want. But the name of the game is to be able to have discernment to distinguish with what you want from what you need, because chances are you don't really want what you think you want. So these devices that you're mentioning here, that are the technology of putting humans together for mating purposes, they're a technology that is just a new form of technology like older forms of technology. So university campuses, college campuses, churches, etc. These are in very, very real and concrete ways mating technologies where people find one another, and they find one another in contexts where they'll be able to complete one another. So that's one way to think about all of society. All of society is a mating app in some sense. And so universities, where people often go to universities without knowing that they're unconsciously biologically driven to do this for the purpose of fitness and mating and so forth, those are really, really expensive apps, so to speak, for mating. And this is a way of interpreting it. It's not totally 100% the interpretation, but it's part of why they exist, for sure. So that's really, really expensive compared to, for example, these sorts of apps. But at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter what the technology is or what the social institutions are that bring people together. What matters is that you're able to you're able to distinguish through discernment the difference between what you want and what you need, and to distinguish when what you want is actually not what you want, but what you're driven for because of biological things. So when we talk about the matrix and all this stuff, what we're really talking about is how our chemistry is designing illusions of what we want, hiding what we really need, and forcing us to live out lives of silent desperation that make us suffer. And then we get to the end and we're just like, oh my goodness, I did all of this for something I didn't want. And then we die in misery. Tolstoy wrote about this in great detail in Ivan. Death of Ivan Ilyich, I believe it's called. And that guy just wishes he had lived his life differently, went after what he really needed in life instead of what he wanted. So that is called Dude from Nepal again. Good to see you, Dude from Nepal. Thanks for saying hello. All right, Physical says, putting humans together for mating purposes. Oh, how good it is to be alive. Yes. James says, no, this person is always nice to me and they don't have a friend. I don't have friends and she flirts with me, but I never had a girlfriend. The technology is... Anyway, I'm not a dating guru or anything like that, but basically, if you would like to have relationships with people, be the best possible version of yourself. Go after what you want. Be willing to fail. Be willing to succeed. And just, I don't know. I can't really advise you, and none of this is advice. But in my own circumstances where I found the partner who was not only right for me, but like really, really perfect, it was because I finally just woke up to the fact that I need to focus on myself, being the best possible version that I can be, and then everything just snapped into place. But trying to, be fulfilled by another person, it can't happen, because that's not what other people are there to do. Other people are there to realize who they really are and to be self-fulfilling entities. It's very sad that people go through their entire lives and never become self-aware or self-actualized or fulfilled by themselves, by who they really are. But all of culture is this giant machine trying to help you find something that will help you recognize that fundamental truth and then put it into practice. Practically every movie is doing this, is telling the story of a hero who recognized that their driving ambition was not what they really wanted, and they saw the illusion for what it is, and then they saw what they really needed. They became self-actualized, and then they just defeat the bad guy like that, like it's nothing, because they realize that like their real power, the symbolic power that they have, comes from that moment of realization, right? And you'll have that in your life too, hopefully sooner than later, because the sooner that you have it, the more you'll realize it. And you know what? You'll have it again and again and again, because just like we watch movies again and again and again, we have situations again and again and again, and we continually need to think, what is the battle here? And the real battle is not the bad guy. It is this conflict between your driving ambition and your unconscious need. And the more that you can get in tune with and find the tools that remove the illusions created by the driving ambition, the more you'll be free and to act properly and act in a way that actually creates the outcomes that you want. So this is, again, exploring your existing mental competence. It is actually creating goals that you can achieve because they're based on existing competence that gives you just enough challenge so that you grow, but not frustration to the point that you give up. It's very, very simple. I don't know if this is connecting with you, but I hope that it is. And you're saying here that you don't have friends because you have a learning disability and you get bullied. I'm sure that if you listen to what I'm saying, what many other people are saying, you can forget about this learning disability and you can deal with bullies. There's got to be ways to do it. I really can't advise because I don't know the whole situation. But if you're different, great. Difference is what we need. We don't need more people who are the same. Own it. Enjoy it. Think about what you can read. Again, I criticized a few things with Jordan Peterson today, but I just highly recommend going through it anyway. Read Maps of Meaning. Read 12 Rules for Life. You'll find things there. Read all the books we talked about today. Read Skeptic. Just own your difference. Enjoy it. What is so different about you that that could be anything other than an asset if you really, really were to dive in. Learning disability is a very, very controversial and fraught area. I was a tutor in the Learning Disabilities Laboratory, as we call it, the Learning Disabilities Lab at York University. I never bought into it for a second, this whole notion of learning disability. There's other problems here. People they have diets that are driving them crazy, irritants. They have all kinds of sleep issues. They're basically sleeping with these things in their bed, which is just absolute nonsense. You want to kill yourself and have a learning disability? Sleep with this. It's just a terrible thing to be doing. They're filling their devices filled with apps that are notifying them all the time. And then they're studying topics at school that they don't enjoy, they have no passion about. They're being forced to do it by the promise that this or that degree is going to get them a job, which may or may not be true, but they don't even really want that job, and so on and so on. We can go down the whole list. The point is that, is it a learning disability or is it a passion disability? Is it a context disability? And what could you do to actually just reframe things and then change the situation? Go do something else, study something else, and so on. Go to a different school, whatever it takes. I'm sure that you can do it. And if not, then what can I say? Read Waking Up by Sam Harris. Read Free Will by Sam Harris. And I think you'll find some great tools there that'll help you change. Even if you don't have free will. Ironic, but possible. Eric says he enjoyed 12 Rules for Life. Gifted it to your friend. Excellent, excellent. Cool. In many ways, I see my new book as kind of a mixture of Moonwalking with Einstein, 12 Rules for Life, and the Bhagavad Gita. It's kind of all this sort of stuff. Shadeep is here, says hello, says it's good to be different. It is good to be different. You know, one of my theme songs when I was a kid, because I was a different kid, to be sure, they did all kinds of weird stuff to me. They thought that I should choose a hand and tried to force me to be right-handed when I preferred my left hand. I wound up kind of dual-handed in the end. They put me in a special class, sent me to the hospital, and I behaved strangely. It was mostly diet stuff. I didn't have a learning disability. I had a context problem, amongst many other problems. And I was different, but I loved this song from Weird Al, Dare to Be Stupid. I mean, if you haven't heard Dare to Be Stupid, go and check it out. Check out Weird Al. Like, Weird Al is the great champion of people who are different. And, you know, I don't know how to deal with bullies, but one thing is, you know, just be careful out there. Maybe go study a martial art. I recommend Sistema, if that's possible for you, or study meditation. Be a master of your own domain. Bullying does not have to rule your life, and you know, I can't advise. I just know that there's ways out, and you would need to explore them in your context with the fullest powers of discernment, and just trust that there's ways out. I was bullied when I was a kid. I was bullied not only, once in a while in elementary school, but also in high school. And one of the ways I dealt it in high school was just with humor. And ultimately, they couldn't really get very far because I, was able to talk quite quickly and tell jokes and just be like somehow a jack of all trades. I just sort of knew a little bit of everything. And I was a chameleon in some sense. And I became a chameleon. And that was very, very helpful to deal with it. But another thing to do is to think about your inner bully that you may have and how you bully yourself. And that's what we talked about a lot today. So if you didn't see the whole thing and didn't read some of these books, of all the books that, might help you is the Robert Lang's material, Love and Death and Psychotherapy, for example, where you learn about the different anxieties. So predator anxiety, prey anxiety, existential anxiety, those things can help you. But that's all that we have for today, my friends. Really interesting discussion. Thank you for your participation in it. Jaideep says, I'm still defining myself in different ways than others. Yes, and we are always becoming. We're in a state of emergence. And that's what we talked about earlier today, is understanding that things are not as fixed as they seem, even though there are some things that very much are fixed. But we have a lot more potential for change, and we are going to change. We are changing. We're changing right now as we speak. So embrace the change and have a great time, everybody, in life, because there is a great time to be had, even if you have to earn it through action. And that is something that you will enjoy. Thank you for that music recommendation, James. I always love music recommendations. I'm going to check that out. Really appreciate it. And Physical says, Dr. Metivier was a crass humor guy in high school. I'd love to be friends with old Dr. Metivier. Well, I'm not that different, to tell you the truth, that I'm aware of. But yeah, I used to do stand-up routines in high school. And that was one of the things that, was my defense mechanisms. Because I learned that if you can make people laugh, then they can't actually get away with the same levels of bullying. And my mom has always said you should be a comedian. I actually don't think I'm that funny, but I did do comedy. I have done comedy, and I often think about going back and doing comedy again. But music also, like music is not comedy, but it is that ability to entertain, to be the holder of the mechanism of entertainment. That's a very powerful thing, to be skilled. And you might still get bullied, but at the end of the day, you've got to just go with it and have humor, or stand up to it. But again, I can't advise in your particular context. But even in one of my bands, I was like bullied by some of the members, quote unquote bullied. Like they just would tell jokes that were unacceptable, and they weren't funny to me, and I let them know that it wasn't funny to me. Did it lead to a little bit of riffs and even lost friendship in the end? Yeah, but I just don't put up with certain things, and I'm not going to put up with certain things. And you've got to kind of pick your battles and just say enough is enough. There's certain things that just aren't funny to me, and so that's it. And it's sad to lose friends. It breaks my heart when you sometimes have to lose friends, but it just is the way it goes sometimes, and you've got to be able to let negative people go. My friend Jonathan Levy, he often says, some people, some things are for a season, a reason, or a life. And I think very few things are for an entire life. But some things certainly are for a season or for a reason. And that's very wise, a very wise thing that I'm happy to share with you. So thank you again, everybody. And thank you for the further music recommendations. I've got my browser full of things to explore, and if I were to give a music recommendation, let me see. Something from French Canada, my friends. Voivod. Check that out. Oh, I'm not even allowed to type in my own thing. Sorry. Why am I getting errors on typing my own live stream chat? Weird. I wonder if we've been hacked. I'll go and check that. But thanks everybody for being here today. Really appreciate the time that we could have, and I love when you catch me up with a few more questions at the end. Come again to the next one. Make sure you got those notifications on. Make sure you're subscribed to this channel if you aren't. Hit the thumbs up if you haven't already, and let me know where in the world you are when you communicate and what questions you have. And if you have any suggestions for what you'd like to see in 2019, please put them in the discussion after, or get in touch at Anthony@magneticmemorymethod.com. Take the free course at magneticmemorymethod.com. And until we have a chance to speak again, keep yourself magnetic. Bye-bye.